Hello, it's the Drisky here and welcome to another fabulous bonus video to the RGDS podcast. This time I'm looking at the personal top 100 arcade style racing games across any platform. It's a genre very dear to my own heart. Now, with looking at such a wide range of games, I will undoubtedly miss some of people's favourites. And I may skip over some historically important games in the genre because the focus is on what I enjoy playing today, not what is historically important in the genre. But that's okay. I mean, the purpose of the video is a bit of fun. It's trying to introduce people to some games you might not be aware of, or games that you'd forgotten in the distant recesses of time, and encourage you to sort of like boot it up in an emulator or track down the original game and give it another go. And if you do give it another go, please reach out in the comments. I mean, it's so difficult to get noticed in YouTube algorithm, and commenting and interacting with the videos means so much. Partly because it just lets me know people are enjoying the content and the effort that I'm putting into these videos. But let's set out my criteria for this list before we begin, and why some games that you might include are missed. You see, for me, an arcade racer is a racing title that puts fun and instant accessibility above realistic vehicle mechanics or storyline progression. So don't expect to see games like Gran Turismo or Forza here, or even Forza Horizon, which I feel bridges the gap between arcade and realistic simulation. I don't really personally enjoy Forza Horizon, if I'm being completely honest. I'm also choosing games that I enjoy playing today, so not putting in my list because of how important it is to the evolution of the genre. So, spoiler alert, classics like Pole Position, Turbo and Hard Driving, all incredibly important, and I do enjoy them, but they don't make my list here because there's so many more modern and more accomplished arcade racers that went on further with the genre that made my limited list of 100. Also, some modern racers that I think are really good arcade racers, but their intrusive cost models and nickel and diming you at every turn just meant I had to exclude them from my list because those elements ruined the game for me. Yes, Dirt 5 and Codemasters and EA, I'm looking at you. It's shocking. Finally, to make the list more interesting, I've tried to limit multiple games in the series appearing in my top 100 wherever possible. So instead, I'm giving one game in the series as a proxy for all of them to shout all the games out. But as I say, I mean, don't take it too seriously. It's a personal list. It's just a bit of fun. And really, the main focus is not the positioning of the games and what I've put at number 1 or 100. It's more about identifying in a fun way some really good arcade racers, and I think there's a lot of hidden gems that many might not know about. So, if it encourages people to sort of reach out and try some of these games, then that's wonderful. And I should add, a lot of these games get completely new life with emulation, because they get upscaled by brilliant emulators like DuckStation or the PS2 emulator, or Redream, which is a Dreamcast emulator. There's no excuse than trying these games. It will be a real revelation for people to enjoy. Anyway, enough about the preamble, let's start the list. Right at number 100 we have Buggy Heat, or known in America as the stupid name, quite frankly, TNN Motorsports Hardcore Heat. Now, it came out in 1999 and only on the Dreamcast, developed by CRI Middleware and published by Crave. I love this buggy arcade racer. It's got good racing physics, nice graphics. It really was impressive when it got released on the Dreamcast. Yes, of course, like a lot of arcade races at the time, it's quite limited in tracks, I guess, but they're well designed and fun. I mean, it does have some frustrations, which is why it's lower on my list, such as crashing and spinning often means you'll just have to restart the game, and you can't usually recover if you spin. It's very easy to do it because of the terrain. It's very easy to to catch the edge of a track and spin, or even hit another car and spin. But it's one that I wanted to shout out. It's there's better known games like Midway's Off-Road Thunder, but I wanted to shout this one because no one ever talks about it, and it looks beautiful in the Redream emulator of the Dreamcast, which runs this perfectly. Okay, I'm going to squidge in another game because talking about off-road has got me thinking, and let's call this 99B, so I guess this is 101 games in my list, and the one that I wanted to add was Hardcore 4x4. This, again, in America is known as TNN Motorsports Hardcore 4x4. And in Japan, it's known as Deka Yonku Tough the Truck is the rough translation in Japan. Now, it's made by Gremlin, and it came out in 1996 on the PS1 and Sega Saturn, later on the PC in 1998. Now, I adored this back in the day on the Saturn, with its great racing mechanics, it's a nice variety to the tracks, not to mention some pretty good weather effects. It's definitely one that I think is worthy of playing. I think it was under-reviewed back in the day. I think people were looking for more encompassing races at the time, more simulation, and therefore it was unfairly marred, really. And it plays fantastic on the PS1 DuckStation emulator or the Saturn. Certainly the Saturn emulation and the game is the one that I more fondly remember personally, but the PS1 DuckStation version is really, really good as well. Okay, let's move on to the next game really, which is number 99, and we have Fatal Racing, released in 1995 by Gremlin and developed by them on the PC. Now, it's known as Whiplash in the US, bizarrely, and this title was way ahead of its time, with it offering great realistic 3D racing and interesting tracks, and it's basically a Sega Daytona clone, but giving you the experience in the home, which is so impressive when you think it's 1995. It's definitely one forgotten by most today, and it's a real shame because this is a lot of fun to play, and it's annoying that GOG or any of the official sites like Steam or what have you have this game. Unfortunately, you can see it on wish lists left, right and centre, but they've never been able to bring it across for whatever reason. But this is just a fun game, and you can find it on abandonware sites. I just love the tracks. I mean, there's obstacles and jumps. It's just really, really good Daytona clone that most people won't know about. So it's got a cult following, but not well known, and therefore worthy of people playing today. Right, let's go on to number 98, and we have the racing classic, well, to me, racing classic, Crash and Burn, released on the PS2 and Xbox in 2004. It's published by Eidos and made by the British developer Climax. Yes, the team behind games like MotoGP and Split Second Velocity, a game I love, or the Disney car games, which are underappreciated gems as well. It's all about racing and crashing, and it's just a massive amount of fun, really elevating it above being merely a clone of sort of like Burnout meets Demolition Derby. It holds its own, in my opinion. Now, the game combines high-speed racing with intense vehicle combat, allowing players to customise their vehicles and weapons and armour. Players can compete in a variety of race modes, including a Demolition Derby, Last Man Standing type game as well. I just find it's fast-paced, and I love the customisation options. It just makes it a fun, engaging experience, and it's one that nobody ever talks about today. I think it needs to be played by more. I will say some of the unbalanced, cheap AI lets the game down a bit, often being frustrating unnecessarily. This to me is well worthy of your time, and another one that's great on emulation or can be picked up cheaply on eBay. Now on to number 97. 1997, and we have another gem with Carmageddon, released in 1997 by publisher Interplay and developed by the Isle of Wight developer Stainless Steel. Now, it came out on PC and Mac, and later saw a PS1 and N64 port. It's set in the future, and you've got lots of zombies and mutants to run over in the game. It's got like dark humour, and it's just fun and a laugh to play even today. Yes, some of the tracks are frustrating in their design. It's quite often easy to get lost and make a wrong turn in some of the tracks, but I think this is a worthy game, and it's one that I love coming back to, especially that you can buy it officially from GOG.com with all the DLC included at full price at $5.99. So, you know, wait for a sale if $5.99 is too rich for your blood, and, you know, give it a go. Right, let's go on to number 96, and it's another Dreamcast game released in 2000 called Looney Tunes Space Race, published by Infogrames and developed by them. Infogrames Melbourne House. It was, you know, they bought up Melbourne House, and this is a great cel-shaded racer, really, sort of taking elements of Mario Kart but replacing them with your favourite characters of the day, such as Looney Tunes, Bugs Bunny and Marvin the Martian, etc. It's just a lot of fun. I mean, you have to get used to using the turbos in the right way, and it can be challenging from that regard. But no, it's still one that I have a lot of fun with. Bizarrely, the PS2 port that came later, I don't get on with. I don't know if that's just my nostalgia, but try the Dreamcast original is my suggestion. Onwards and up, well, downwards, I guess. We reach number 95, and we have Sega's 1997 arcade game Le Mans 24. Now, this used many of the assets of Scud Racer with some of the cars, and it attempts to recreate the famous 24-hour race. It has some impressive transitions from day to night and some cool weather effects. Now, it's not to be confused with the equally brilliant Infogrames Le Mans 24 game that came out on Dreamcast and PS1, etc., which is brilliant, by the way, but this is the Sega arcade classic that most missed. I mean, you could argue it is one of the weaker Sega arcade races. It's missing some of the instant accessibility of the other Sega arcade games, and, you know, I can see why it didn't take off the way as others did, but you know, it's got great tracks, and a bad or a weaker Sega arcade racer is typically better than most arcade racers out there. And, you know, if you've got a good enough PC, you can play it on the Sega Model 3 emulator, which runs this game pretty much perfectly. I mean, it's a great way of playing it. Right, now on to number 94, and we have a Biker Mice from Mars, released on the SNES in 1994 by Konami and developed by them. Now, based on that sort of turtle cartoon knockoff of the 90s, this gives a really fun isometric racer. I mean, think Rock and Roll Racing or games of that ilk. Players can choose from 6 different characters, each with unique bikes and special abilities. I mean, I don't really know the cartoon from Adam, really, but this is a fun little arcade racing game with, you know, good variety of tracks and race modes, and it just keeps you going. Now, I will say there was a sequel or another game that came out on the PS2 called Biker Mice from Mars, which was more from behind racing game. I know there's a lot of people that actually quite enjoy that game and would recommend that, but I didn't get on with that as much as the SNES version that I've chosen here. Okay, moving on, and we are at number 93, and the little known arcade game called A.B. Cop. Now, it's published and made by Sega and released in 1990. This has you as a futuristic cop riding an air bike, hence the name AB, and dashing through the streets after criminals. I mean, think Chase HQ, but set in the future. I mean, I think this is a great game. It's got good sprite scaling, nice variety, and if you love your Chase HQ idea of bashing the vehicles off the road and sort of like capturing them, this is another alternative. and well worthy of your time. Right, let's go on to number 92, and we have Nigel Mansell's World Champion Racing. Yes, it's another Gremlin graphics game and released in 1992 for the Amiga. Fortunately, right at the time when Nigel Mansell had won the Grand Prix, so it was a great timing by Gremlin. This offers, realistic racing experience. I mean, it's got detailed car models, but it's still all about fun and arcade. It still plays fantastically well today. There's nice recreation of all the tracks, and I love the music. It's just another solid Gremlin racing game which I have a lot of time for, so definitely one to give a go with. Particularly I would probably say the Amiga CD32, because it did come out on the SNES as well, which is a good version, but the Amiga CD32 obviously has the CD music, which I think is probably just elevates it above from the pack as the one to try. Okay, talking of Gremlin inspired racers, we have Jaguar XJ220, developed by Core Design, who of course used to be Gremlin and had separated when they were removed from them. Basically, they lost their jobs in Derby. This came out in 1992 and of course was their answer to the Gremlin Lotus series, and they did a really good job here, obviously choosing the Jaguar XJ220 supercar, which is a lovely, beautiful car. And they did some really nice ideas here. I mean, it's not just a Lotus clone, it's got a wonderful variety of tracks. I love the fact that you compete both as an individual or as a team with your respective sort of car manufacturer, and I think that just elevates it up. And it's got some beautiful music as well. I mean, really, I love the Jaguar music. I mean, the one thing, it does feel a little, even though it's going at a good rate, for whatever reason it feels a little slow and pondering, and that's probably why it's lower on my list, but it's still one that I have a lot of time for and I keep going back to. Right, let's go on to number 90, and we have Chase HQ 2, released in the arcades, and this one's great. It's not to be confused with the SCI. This is the one that came out later. It's got great visuals and bashing the cars all in the usual way. Nice to see a video version of Nancy. She's a pretty girl in this, and it's an engaging game. I mean, it just takes Chase HQ and runs with the idea. And sadly, it's never seen a home port. It's only ever appeared in the arcades. Now, thankfully, you can play it at home in Techno Parrot emulator. Also, Arcade Club in Bury does actually have the original arcade cabinet to play, along with all the other Chase HQ games, incidentally. But it's really nice to be able to play this on the original arcade hardware. Right, let's go on to number 89, and we have Rock and Roll Racing. This was developed by Silicon and Synapse, of course better known as Blizzard Entertainment, the people behind games like World of Warcraft and what else. And this came out in 1993 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, it's isometric, as you can see, and it's a vehicle combat racing game, but what elevates it even further from being a fantastic game is the wonderful classic rock music that plays throughout. Now, I really adore and love this. Particularly the music elevates it. Now, one of the things I would say, there is the Blizzard Arcade Pack, which is a recent re-release, which has a lot of the Silicon and Synapse early games. In fact, that's really what it focused on. Great collection. But one of the things that they did in that collection is they've actually improved, as well as being able to play all the original games, they've improved it. So you can play a widescreen version of this game on that pack with choices to even choose the original music tracks, not just the chip tunes if you want. Lots of other improvements, and that's probably the best way to play it today. And usually you can buy that Blizzard Arcade Pack, Arcade Classics I think it's called, really cheap when it comes up on a sale on whatever system that you particularly like using. Right, we're on number 88, and it's Twisted Metal Black. This was made by Incognito Entertainment in 2001 for the PlayStation 2, and it's another vehicular combat game that takes the Twisted Metal series to sort of darker and grittier territory. You've got the usual mad roster of twisted characters and the weapons. I just love this. I think this, whilst I love the entire Twisted Metal series, I think this one was the best. It never was surpassed. I think, it's one that needs to be played more of today. It's a series that sadly has been left on the cutting room floor, and particularly sad that the recent Twisted Metal cancellation by Sony, who tried to do yet another live service action game on their platform and failed miserably. Okay, let's go on to number 87, and we have Driver. Now, Driver was developed by Reflections Interactive, yes, the people behind Shadow of the Beast and all those classics, and it came out in 1999 for the PlayStation 1. I really like this. You could argue it's perhaps fails my limited scope of arcade racing, I have to admit this, but I love it enough to include it, because you get to play an undercover cop, Tanner, and it's brings to mind all of those fantastic car chases of the 70s. It does such a wonderful job of, interesting missions and high-speed chases, getaways, undercover assignments, the open world environments and realistic arcade still where it's fun mechanics. It just makes the game Driver stand out. It's such a shame we haven't seen a Driver sequel all these years later. I will say the opening level in the car park where you have to do all these things is really, really poor, and it's so annoying because a lot of people will struggle with that and not be able to get past it. But battle through that and you've got a good arcade racer here, in my opinion. Right, let's go on to number 86, and we have Destruction Derby 2. This came out also by Reflections Interactive and came out in 1996, so it was like very early in the PlayStation life. Now, of course, Destruction Derby 1 was actually, I believe it was a launch game, and they really showed what they were capable of. Of course, in Destruction Derby, you're sort of taking like these old battered cars and you're bashing. But whilst the first one was rushed because they were getting it out for launch release, the second one, they've added so much more content. There's high-speed races. It still has all the fantastic damage, and it's a lot of fun to play. It just plays really well today, as it always did, particularly if you play on upscaled in something like Duck Station. Right, let's go on to number 85, and we have Smugglers Run. This was developed by Angel Studios and of course published by Rockstar Games. Now, it's an open world racing game where there was a launch title on the PlayStation 2, and you take the role of a smuggler. You're basically going from place to place picking up the goods, but there's so many multiplayer elements. It's just a lot of fun going back to. Maybe I should have chosen the sequel, which expanded on the content, but I've chosen the original Smugglers Run because it was one that I've played the most of. I got so many nostalgic memories of this game, and one that I love coming back to today. It plays brilliant upscaled through an emulator as well. Right, let's go on to number 84, and we have Enduro Racer. This was published and developed by Sega in 1986, and it's an arcade racing game that gets pretty forgotten about today. It's not as well known as all the other Sega arcade races, and it has you here control a motocross bike and you race through off-road tracks. And one of the cool things is as you go over obstacles, you actually jump in the air, so you jump long distances. And with the arcade controller, you actually have to pull back or down on the actual sort of the actual handlebars to simulate the jumping as well as all the usual racing. It's one of those, actually, maybe I do prefer playing it at home rather than on the arcade. It seems to play better in MAME for some reason. Played the original arcade cabinet relatively recently in Arcade Club in Blackpool. They have this game. but I just didn't get on with it. I don't know whether the controls were wrong. Of course, it has amazing home ports like on the Spectrum, etc. But yeah, it's one that I have a lot of time for and well worthy of a play. Right, let's go on to number 83, and we have Burning Road. Now, this was developed by Toka and published by Playmates Interactive, and it's an arcade-style racing game that came out in 1996 on the PlayStation, and it's a brilliant Ridge Racer style clone game that plays fantastically well. I mean, it's got great variety of tracks, really tight arcade controls, and it's got a pretty good selection of cars, and they all handle differently. And I think the thing that I love about it is it really does have vibrant colour and really popping colour that just jumps out at you. It really feels like an arcade game. In some ways more than Ridge Racer on the PS1. It just has that popping visuals and the Sega blue skies, even though of course it's not Sega. It's one that nobody ever talks about as well, so I'm so glad to shout out and hopefully introduce more people to the game here. Okay, we're on number 82, and I've chosen Excite Truck. This came out on the Wii in 2006 and was published by Nintendo. And it's a game that emphasises speeds and stunts. You're riding trucks around the place and just plays really well. I mean, I find the Wii remote controls a little gimmicky, maybe. You've got to tilt the controls, etc. But just as an arcade racer, this is a lot of fun, and it's one that a lot of people just assume that the Wii had just trash after trash, which there was a lot of rubbish games on there, but there are some really good gems hidden amongst them, and Excite Truck is one of them. Definitely needs to be played by more today. Okay, let's go on to number 81, and we have Racing Hero by Sega in the arcades, and this is great. I mean, Racing Hero was published by Sega in 1990, and it's a sort of up-close motorbike racing game, sort of calling the idea of like Outrun in terms of the colour palette and some of the cars you see on the road with Super Hang-On, but really it's a totally different beast because you're really zoomed in behind the motorcyclist, and therefore it becomes less about racing and more about negotiating the other traffic, making it a totally different game but no less engaging for that. I really like it, and it's one that I have a lot of time for. I've been lucky enough to play it a couple of times in the arcades. There used to be a retro shop in Birmingham, was still there, that used to have this, and it appeared at some of the retro events as well. Maine does a perfect job of recreating it as well though, so that's another way of enjoying this. Okay, let's go on to number 80, and I've chosen Hotshot Racing, developed by Lucky Mountain Games and Sumo Digital, and this is a retro style arcade racing game released in 2020 for multiple platforms, the PS4, Xbox One and the Switch and PC of course. I really like this. It offers like a colourful low polygon graphics reminiscent of games like Virtua Racing back in the day, but this has a lot of variety, and particularly even more generous now. It adds the included DLC, which expands. It's a great lineup of characters and all their sort of like speeches and little sound bites that they give. Really adds to the already solid gameplay. I really like this one, and it's one that I think well known, but if you haven't tried it, give it a go. You can pick it up on pretty much all the current stores and current systems. Okay, let's go on to number 79, and I've gone for Juiced, developed by the Juice Games and published by THQ. It's a street racing game released in 2005 for multiple platforms, including the PS2, Xbox and PC. And, it's yet another illegal street racing, car customizations, very Need for Speed in that regard. But it's just something I've always gelled with Juiced and its sequel. I don't know, I find it a really fun sort of racing model that you're following, and just great mechanics, and just one that I love coming back to, and it's one that often gets forgotten about, which is why I wanted to include it here. These days probably the best way to play it is on the PS2 emulator, or just pick it up for pennies on the PS2. Obviously the PC and Xbox have better resolutions of that, unless you play it on an emulator, which of course will upscale everything beautifully. Okay, let's go on to number 78, and I've gone for The Simpsons Road Rage. This was developed by Radical Entertainment and published by Electronic Arts. This is essentially Crazy Taxi in Springfield and the Simpson universe, and it came out in 2001 on the PS2, Xbox and GameCube. I mean, what a better combination, Crazy Taxi is a brilliant arcade racing game. The idea going from person to person, picking them up and taking them somewhere else, and get your taxi fare right. But with all the Simpson roster of characters and being able to see all the little in-jokes as you're going around Springfield, it's wonderful. Yeah, you seldom sort of see it get mentioned these days. It did get sued, I believe, and successfully by Sega, who were rather, as you can imagine, unhappy with how close this was to Crazy Taxi. I will say as well, there is the Simpsons Hit and Run, which is as a game even better. It's basically The Simpsons does Grand Theft Auto. It is hit and run, but obviously in terms of the constraints of the arcade racing genre, really the Road Rage is the only one to choose, but both I would highly recommend. It's fantastic. Of course, these days I would probably say the GameCube version through a Dolphin emulator, or buying the GameCube version, is the best quality version, because of course it's a higher res system. But of course there's not much in it, particularly with emulation, just PS2 or GameCube, because it upscales it anyway. Okay, let's go on to number 77, and I've gone for Crash Team Racing. Crash Team Racing was developed by Naughty Dog and released in 1999 for the PS1. And, this is a Mario Kart clone, really, but with characters from the Crash Bandicoot series. You've got a great roster of characters, and it's got fantastic tracks, well designed, and interesting power-ups, and, really is particularly good. I think better in some ways than Mario Kart in terms of its single player experience, because you got a story driven adventure mode thrown in as well, and you combine that with tight controls, fun gameplay, charming presentation. It just makes it a beloved title in the kart racing genre. And of course, these days, playing it on Duck Station with the PS1 upscales it really nicely, but there is, of course, a remaster of this game, and that's by far the best way to play it, which you can buy on all the current systems, all the current consoles, so that's probably the best way to play it today. Okay, let's go on to number 76, and I've chosen SPGP Super Polygon Grand Prix Racing. I believe this came out in 2023, and it's another indie fantastic racer, sort of aping the ideals of Virtua Racing, but it's made by Roz Games, one individual in the UK, and it's a real labour of love for him. You can see with all his sort of tweets and quotes, this is a fantastic racing game, and he's improved it again and again, because he's always doing free tweaks of the game and experience of it, improving the AI and things, and he really gets what makes arcade racing so good, much better than some of the others in my experience, and that's why I rate this so highly. Yeah, just great tracks, great handling, just that one more go mechanics, great music. I can't sing its praises highly enough. I think it's awesome. Okay, let's go on to number 75, and this is Ray Tracers, developed by Taito and released in 1997 for PlayStation. This is essentially a Chase HQ game in all but name. I mean, it gives it a sort of futuristic-y look, racing at night, and adds weaponry and stuff. But essentially, you're a cop and you're taking out the enemy crime barons and things like that. It's just a really good arcade racer. Never gets talked about today, and I think a lot of people need to go back and try this, particularly if you love your Chase HQ games. Of course, you can usually to buy it does go for occasionally quite a pretty penny. It's quite a rare game that's was quite sought after. But of course you can play it on DuckStation emulator, which is PS1 emulator. That upscales it beautifully, and that's probably the best way to play it today. Okay, let's go on to number 74, and I've gone for Stun Runner. Stun Runner was developed and published by Atari Games, and is an arcade racing game that was released in 1989. I mean, it really was at the cutting edge of 3D racing. It was one of the first that I think I'd seen out there, and it goes at an incredible pace as you're hurtling down tunnels and taking out the enemies. Of course you can shoot the enemies, and of course there's the destructive models. You'll lose a wing of your craft if you crash into too many things. It's all about against the clock, so finding the boosts and making your way through in the quickest amount possible. Very exciting, very engaging. You know, these days you can play it on MAME perfectly. Did appear in the Midway Arcade Treasure 1 or 2, I believe. So that was one way to legitimately play it way back when. But yeah, MAME's probably the best way. I will say Arcade Club in Bury does have this game, the full cab, where you get to sit as it's like a jet bike, and you know, sit there and fly through. It's a wonderful experience, and probably the best way to play it, of course. Right, okay, let's go on to number 73. We're rattling through these, and I've chosen Midtown Madness 3, developed by DICE, or Digital Illusions CE, and published by Microsoft Game Studios. This is an open world racing game. It came out in 2003 on the Xbox, and you know, it only has you race around either Paris or Washington DC, but there's so much to do, and it's got great physics models and so many other cars and traffic. It just makes it feel a living and breathing city. It gives you tons of single player and multiplayer modes. You know, so you got your usual checkpoint races, which is the meat and veg of it, but you also got to capture the flag and cruise modes. And I remember getting this for the Xbox. It was part of the pack. I got this, Midtown Madness and Halo was built into the pack, and then on the deal that I got on the Xbox I was able to choose another game, which I chose Project Gotham 2, so that gives you an idea of the period of which I bought it. Now, that was a fantastic trilogy of games, and made me a great lover of the Xbox as a platform. Okay, let's go on to number 72, and I've chosen Radmobile. Yes, it's another Sega arcade racing game, this time from 1991, and it probably is the last sprite scaling type racing game they did. This is really, really good. It's sort of like you're racing in car, and you're making your way through the roads. It's got great different weather modes, oncoming traffic. Maybe looks a little clunky by these sort of standards of today, but at the time, and there's still something charming about it, and at the time it was groundbreaking. One of the things it's of course famous for is the little Sonic that appeared as a little hangable on the car, and you know, that was really sort of the first introduction that the world got of Sonic the Hedgehog, so that's a nice little touch there. Sadly, it never saw a home port, Radmobile, which is really a shame, because, well, it did. It came out as Gale Racer in the Sega Saturn in Japan. It's not a very good home port either, so, you know, really a lot of people sort of missed this. Sadly, I've only ever got to play it the real arcade machine at Retro Event now and again. Very seldom see it, unfortunately, but MAME does a reasonable job, although you can never get the controls quite right. Of course it did. I think it came on one of the Arcade 1-Up collections, the Outrun stand-up, so it's there as well. But yeah, for mere mortals that don't have the space for it, yeah, the MAME, or just being lucky enough to find it, really is the best way to play this game. Okay, let's go on to number 71, and I've gone for Screamer 2, developed by Milestone and published by Virgin Interactive. This is a racing game that came out in 1996 for MS-DOS, and was kind of their answer to Ridge Racer and those arcade games of that ilk. And this is a great, I mean, obviously the first one was really, really impressive. But the second one sort of ups the variety of cars and tracks to choose from. That's why I'm choosing Screamer 2 over Screamer 1, but I recommend them all really. It still holds up fantastically well today with fast-paced gameplay, smooth controls, and impressive graphics of its time, and still with the charm of today really. And I really, really like this, and it's great that all the Screamers you can actually buy officially on GOG.com. You usually wait for a sale and you can pick it up for peanuts, but it's not very much even if you don't. And that's the best way if you have a PC to enjoy the game. It emulates perfectly. Okay, let's go on to number 70, and I have chosen Scud Race. Scud Race is also known as Sega Super GT, and it's basically an arcade racing game from 1996. This is really, really cool, taking the idea of games like Daytona, but making it more fantastical and more arcadey racing, not being constrained by the Daytona license. But the handling is pretty much like Daytona. You'll see a lot of similarities, but I just love it. I mean, it's one that again never saw a home port, sadly. The Dreamcast version got cancelled back in the day, and it is a real shame because this game has some amazing tracks on it and amazing, exciting racing. Incidentally, I think Outrun 2 on the Xbox had some hidden unlockables allowed you to race on the Scud Racing track, which is great. But really, the only way of enjoying this game, I think it's one of the Sega model emulators, maybe Sega Model 3 is the one to use, or it'll be 2. And probably Scud Race Plus is the one to choose from. But yeah, no, outside of that emulator, really, there's no real way to play it. You're very lucky to see it out in the wild. I think I've not actually been there, but I think I've heard that Arcade Club in Leeds has Scud Race, which is, in the UK. So maybe that's a great way of playing it. But, to be honest, you can get it running pretty well with the Sega model emulator. Okay, let's go to 69, baby, and it's Spy Hunter 2 on the PS2. No, not the terrible Spy Hunter 2 sequel to the arcade game in the 80s. This is the sequel to the remastered ones that Midway did and developed by Angel Studios. The sequel came out in 2003. The originals version of the game came out in 2001, the first game, and this is a fantastic reboot. It's everything you'd hope. Essentially, it's a James Bond racing game that we never ever got. You get all the gadgets, the gizmos, you get to change from a car to a boat to a motorbike. It just plays fantastically well, and as good as the first remaster is, the one that came out in 2001, that does have some difficulty curving issues at the beginning. I mean, there's too much where it's difficult to progress on early on in the game, but I find the sequel is far more balanced and understanding. But really, I recommend both. I think they're both absolutely awesome and well worthy of a play, and if you're a James Bond nut like I am, this is a great addition to Race and Battle 2, so give it a go. I would probably recommend playing it on the PS2 emulator where it upscales it beautifully, but this is one that you could pick up for peanuts, quite frankly, on the PlayStation 2. I think I picked up mine quite recently, a couple of years ago, when I was going through all my racing games and wanting to own them physically, and I think I picked it up for like £3 including postage or something ridiculous, so it's certainly not going to break the bank. Okay, let's go on to number 68, and I've gone for Snowboard Kids 2. This is developed by Rakdim and published by Atlas. Now, I really love this series. It's a snowboard racing game. It came out in 1999 with the sequel, and only on the N64. And the reason I love it, it takes the idea of all those sort of like 1080 and all those other great snowboarding games like SSX, but it gives you little kids rather than like adults, and a bit more cartoony. And I just love it, the colourful graphics, the whimsical characters, really well designed tracks, there's power-ups, obstacles, and I just find the music is awesome. It's just really great gameplay, charming presentation, fantastic multiplayer modes in this as well. It's just an all-encompassing package. It's one that I love going back to again and again, and because it only came out on the N64, I kind of feel that it's fallen out of the memories of a lot of people, and very much would like people to come back to and try these games again. I would say these days playing it on the N64 emulator, where it upscales it beautifully, is probably the best way. Otherwise you can usually find the cart, although N64 games do go for a pretty penny these days, but I'm sure it's not one of the super rare ones, so you might find it for a reasonable price. Okay, let's go on to number 67, and I have chosen Over Top. This was developed by ADK and published by SNK, and it's an arcade racing game, no surprise there, that came out in 1996 for the Neo Geo. The game features isometric graphics and fast-paced racing action. Reminds me of games that are similar, like 1000 Million and Rally or something like that, but I find out of all of them, this is the one that I keep going back to. I find it's the best one of all those derivatives that even came out in the Neo Geo. Partly because it's the roster of different cars you can do, but also the tracks are really well designed, and there's so much variety. You know, 1 minute you're in mountains or deserts or city streets, there's day, night, avoiding all the obstacles, and that's what it's all about really, is sort of like keeping half an eye on the map and knowing when the corners are coming up to do those corners perfectly, or at least learn how to take on the tracks to get to the time limit. I think it's a fantastic game, and it's one that's probably little known today. Now, MAME emulates it perfectly, that's probably the best way to play it, although in Retro Realm in Warsaw they do have a multi-cab cart of all the Neo Geo games, and therefore Over Top is there, so that's a great way to enjoy and play this game, and it plays perfectly. Obviously that's the best way to play it. Okay, let's go on to number 66, and I have chosen Roll Cage Stage 2. This is developed by Attention to Detail and published by Psygnosis, and it's a futuristic racing game that came out in the year 2000 for the PS1 and PC. What you have here is sort of, they're unique vehicles because the wheels allow them to go on the walls or ceilings, and if they flip over they can carry on because the wheels are big enough. It just makes a dynamic and exciting racing experience, and whilst I love the Roll Cage, the first one, Stage 2, Roll Cage Stage 2 just offers even more variety to the tracks, the power-ups, the game modes and multiplayer modes. It just elevates it completely. Now, of course, more recently there's been that game Grip, which is obviously a love letter to this, but I feel that's missing something. The original Roll Cage games, particularly the second one, is still the pole position of the pack. So yeah, give this one a go. Of course, these days, I mean, you could find it on abandonware with PC, but I'd probably suggest play the PlayStation 1 version and, you know, get DuckStation emulator. It emulates it and brings it working perfectly. I should also note the music in this game is stunning. I really like it. So yeah, classic all round. Okay, let's go on to number 65, and I have chosen Sega Rally 3, developed and published by Sega, and this is an arcade game that came out in 2008. It's of course the third in the Sega Rally experience, and it was a massive hiatus from Sega Rally 2 to Sega Rally 3. This offers new tracks, obviously improved graphics, does have some of the older original tracks recreated, at least one or two, and yeah, I mean it's good. I still prefer the first two rally games, but I think this does a lot to do the recreations. You got, you know, nice location, desert, forest, snow covered tracks, driving through the outsourced city. Yeah, I just really enjoy this one. Now, playing it did come digital only on the Xbox 360 and PS3 era, but sadly can't buy it today. It was only digital as well, but again I think it was to do with licensing that it's been taken off. Other ways of playing it is on Technoparrot. That runs it perfectly. That's really the only way to emulate it. Short of that, it does appear in quite a few arcades, and most notably in multiple ones of Arcade Club in either Bury or Leeds, certainly. And that's the best way of playing it, really, because you're playing it sit down in real arcades. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic racing game. I still love playing it. I've set it up on Technoparrot as well, which is one of my definite go-to games. One thing I want to note though, don't get confused by Sega Rally Evo, which came out on the Xbox 360 and PS3. Totally different game and not very good, quite frankly. It's the Sega Rally Arcade that you got on the 360 and PS3 that was digital only. So just calling that out in case people buy the wrong game and deride me for advising them incorrectly. Right, okay, let's go on to number 64, and I've chosen Porsche Challenge, developed by SCE Studios Soho, so an internal studio of Sony, and of course published by Sony. This is a racing game, came out in 1997 for the PlayStation, and it's a game that you only have one car that you can use, which is the Porsche Boxster. I miss those days of just one cars. I think there's too many choices with cars and not enough emphasis on the tracks. To me, the tracks are far more exciting than the cars. That's maybe because I'm not really a petrol head. But this is really, really good. I remember being blown away with this at the time. Sadly, it got overshadowed a little bit because relatively soon it was supplanted by Gran Turismo. But this is obviously a different beast. It's got great different locations, city streets, mountain roads, coastal highways, and it's the typical traditional arcade racer of a championship, single races, and some limited multiplayer. But I think it still holds up incredibly well. It's got amazing music and well worthy of your time. So I would suggest play this on DuckStation where it upscales it and enjoy yourself, really. Or alternatively, it's one that you can typically pick up for really cheap and buy the original disc online. Right, okay, let's go on to number 63, and I've gone for Network Q RAC Rally Championship. Yes, this was developed by Magnetic Fields and published by Europress. Yes, Magnetic Fields are people who did the Lotus Esprit games on the Amiga and ST and all those systems, and of course also did Supercars 1 and 2 as well. So it's safe to say they're a company or development house that knows a bit about creating good racing games. This 1996 released MS-DOS and later the PS1 is no exception, because this is stunning. It's got great racing mechanics set with real life rally stages, and you can do your usual thing as single races or full championship seasons. I just think it had amazing attention to detail. You really feel all the different environments you're in, and I found that was so groundbreaking that I just had to include it. Now I know there's other fantastic rally games like V-Rally and Colin McRae and all those classics, but I wanted to symbolise this one as number 63 for almost all those titles, really. But I wanted to shout out RAC Rally Championship because I think it never gets talked about. Now these days, sadly because of the licensing, you'll have to find it on abandonware on PC, and it's probably the best way to play it. You can of course play it on the PlayStation 1 emulator like DuckStation, but I still find it's a better version on the MS-DOS, the original version, really. But it's up to you really how you come to this game. But I distinctly remember saying to friends at the time when playing this that I can't imagine graphics getting better than this in terms of, whilst I knew the fidelity, the feel of being on a real track. And in some ways I was right with that respect. Of course graphics are infinitely better than how it was in 1996, but I don't know, in terms of the feeling you were there, I think it's not been much bettered, really. But that's just me. So let's go on to number 62, and I have chosen Nitro Bike. This came out in 2008 for the Nintendo Wii. Yes, it's a Nintendo Wii game, and was developed by Left Field Productions and published by Ubisoft. Now, this is an interesting motocross racing game. Takes a lot of inspiration from games like Excitebike, and particularly Excitebike 64. This sort of takes the idea with sort of fast-paced racing, performing stunts, and particularly emphasis naturally on nitro boosts to get your edge over the opponents. And I find it a really exciting game, and of course a lot of people would have passed this by because there was so much sort of dumpware on the Wii that a lot of the classics that exist were just overlooked, and I think Nitro Bike is one of them. Of course, these days you can play it on the Dolphin emulator. That's probably the best way because it will upscale things nicely for you as well. Or, you know, if you look out, you'll find it on the Wii, maybe reasonably cheap. It's one of the more expensive ones, but of course that's a great way to do it. Don't forget your Wii U will upscale it as well. Wii games, so that's another way of enjoying this. Okay, let's go on to number 61, and I have chosen Shox. That's SHOX, and developed by EA and published by them. And this is another off-road rally racing game that came out in 2002 for the PlayStation 2, and I think it passed a lot of people by. It doesn't look on the face of it like it's going to be anything particularly special, and yet it is. It's a really, really good arcade racer, great music, and what arcade racers should be, just like big bombast and in-your-face excitement. One of the selling points or the differentiations of this game is the shock zones, where basically driving through certain points of the sections, if you go as fast as possible, you get extra sort of like bonuses and things like that. And yeah, it's just, I think, really good. It holds up fantastically well, particularly if you play it on Duck Station, where it upscales things as well. But short of that, this is another one. Sorry, not Duck Station. You know, play it on a PlayStation 2 emulator where it upscales it beautifully. I mean, short of that, this is another one you will pick up for pennies. You know, I think when I picked it up when I was getting all my favourite racing games, I think I paid something like £3 or £4 for this, including postage. So it's one of the nice things of collecting arcade racers is that they're so cheap. You know, people don't seem to want them like they do with other genres. Okay, let's go on to number 60, and I have chosen Motorhead. This was developed by Digital Illusions CE, or DICE as they're better known, and published by Gremlin. A very, very early game really of Digital Illusions. You know, of course they did ones on the Amiga as well, but you know, after they had left there in the early days with Gremlin. It came out in 1998 on the PS1 and the PC, and this is just a really solid speed racing, sleek, futuristic vehicles, nice variety of tracks, although they're all set at night, which, you know, people might not like, but it has great sort of like light trails and things like that, and you combine it with a fantastic music. It just makes it a really, really exciting, engaging game. It's one I love going back to, and again, it's another one that seldom gets talked about today. These days I'd probably play it on Duck Station for the PS1. That'll upscale it beautifully and freeze, but you know, if you look out on abandonware sites, I'm sure you'll be able to find the PC version, which of course is another alternative. Right, let's go on to number 59, and I've chosen Lamborghini American Challenge. This was developed by Titus Interactive and released on the machine in 1993. Came out on multiple platforms. The Amiga and Amiga CD32 are the ones that stick mostly in my mind, but it also got a SNES, Super Nintendo Entertainment System release as well, which I'm sure is very, very good. Of course, on the Amiga, this was just a rebadged version of Crazy Cars 3. They rebadged it, added a multiplayer element, and of course the Lamborghini license, but really it's the same game. Now, of course, in this Lamborghini American Challenge, you get to race the Lamborghini Diablo, one of their most sexiest cars. And what I really love with this is it has locations all around America. It focuses on America, and you can choose based on entry so if you have enough tokens to enter one of the cities or one of the locations, and I love that. And of course at the beginning you get also to sort of like gamble, so you get to know the other characters, the AI opponents, and I just love that because you can, you've got a separate bet to win more money or lose more money depending on how you perform. Again, fun music, really smooth as butter. It was a really impressive alternative to your Lotus games, and those are the ilk. Probably after your Lotus games, probably my favourite of that pixel-based racing choices on the Amiga. Now, I also want to make note of a love letter recent indie game known as 80s Overdrive, and this is really, really good as well. I mean, I'd recommend, as long with this, to give that one a go. It doesn't have quite the same, sometimes you don't feel the speed as you should, but it sort of more than makes up for it for the variety, the fun, helping with the difficulty curve of the original, but also particularly the wonderful range of chiptunes that are in the game. They really make this a special game and well worthy of your time. Right, okay, let's go on to number 58, and I've chosen Road Blasters. This is of course developed and published by Atari Games and is a vehicle combat game again that came out in 1987 in the arcades and got lots of home ports. This is one of the first ones I personally had seen from behind, where you were able to shoot the other cars, and I guess similar time to Stun Runner, but there was just something cool about that Mad Max vibe. This is all about sort of like running over and picking up fuel. In some ways, that's one of the things I don't like, is the overemphasis on fuel and not how many craft you or other opponents you take out. But I still love playing this. It's one that I've been lucky enough in Arcade Club in Bury to actually play the stand-up version of it at least, and still holds up incredibly well. I love the sort of like the futuristic steering wheel that you get to control, a bit like, it's very similar to the yoke of Star Wars or something like that. These days, of course, you can play it on MAME, it emulates it perfectly, or it does appear like on the Midway Arcade Treasures 1 or 2, I think the first one, it does appear there as well, so that's a great way to legitimately own it. Definitely one I love going back to. Okay, let's go on to number 57, and you may be surprised it's so low on the list, but I do love it, but it's not without its flaws. It is Power Drift, of course developed by Sega and AM2 and Yu Suzuki, who did so many other like Outrun and Super Hang-On classics, and of course published by Sega. And it came out in 1988, and the game essentially does kart racing. It really was the first kart racer, where it introduced individual characters that, although you couldn't choose from everybody, you got to sort of like know these other characters and see them as you were racing. Of course, what was very different with Power Drift was the way the tracks went up in the air and curved, and whilst it was using sprite scaling, it sort of gave you a real sense of doing a lot of vertical and outlandish sort of roller coaster tracks. The reason it's probably lower, as much as I love the music and I love the gameplay and the vibe and the vibrant graphics, I find it gets a little messy, tries to do too much with sprite scaling technology, and sometimes it's easy to get confused in what you're seeing. Nevertheless, I love this. I've been lucky enough to play it dotted around and retro events and things like that, and I would love to be able to play the sit down deluxe again where it moves, and that was a great way of playing it. I did do it once in one of the retro events, but sadly never ever seen it since. But yeah, these days MAME does as good a job as anything, although sometimes it takes a lot of tweaking to get the steering wheel just right. It does appear on the 3DS, Sega Ages 3DS platform, and that's a wonderful way of playing, because you get Outrun and things like that. Sadly, I've never ever seen, whilst Outrun and a few others have come to modern consoles, they seem to have skipped over Power Drift for some reason. I don't get Sega's strategy. I think they could just make so much money just releasing and re-releasing their old games, but there you go. Yeah, these days probably play it on MAME unless you're lucky to see it on the real hardware dotted around. Okay, let's go on to number 56, and I have chosen R, Racing Evolution. This was developed by Namco and published by them in 2003, and it came out on the PlayStation 2, Xbox and GameCube. Now it is continuation of the Ridge Racer series, if you like. It's like a spin-off, and this just offers the fantastic arcade racing, but more of a story-driven career mode of conducting in a championship. It's quite a well-written and fun story mode. It does mean some of the events are more on rails, but you never feel like your skill level's completely taken out your hands. I just think it's a great game. I think it's got obviously great music. I love everything of Ridge Racer ilk. This is one that people often forget with. Now, of course, you know, back in the day, the GameCube version is probably the best one to buy. It's more powerful hardware and just a better game, quite frankly. And of course, like if you're doing emulation, Dolphin Emulator will do a fantastic job of upscaling this if you've got the hardware. Okay, let's go on to number 55, and I've chosen Outrunners. This was developed and published by Sega and released in 1992, and it's the Outrun sequel that passed a lot of people by. Now, of course, this is actually the third Outrun in the arcade series. You obviously had Turbo Outrun, which was a bit of a misstep, but still fun enough, and I still love it. And then you had Outrunners, which was, it took away the having the Ferrari license, thus the original car, but it did give you a whole range of cars and the characters that drove it. It made it more feel like its original idea of being a cannonball run, an illegal run across, well, not just US, but with all the tracks, it essentially takes you around the world. I think this plays brilliantly. It's got nice music. It still has the Sega blue skies and catchy visuals. Probably the only criticism is, and they sort of went wrong with this with Turbo Outrun as well, the width of the track is too small for the size of the car. So often it's very easy to catch the sides and things, and you don't get that smooth feel as you do with the original Outrun or Outrun 2 that came obviously all those years later. But I still love it. It's a real shame it never ever saw a home port. Well, no, I tell you what, it did see a home port on the Mega Drive, but it was absolutely atrocious and not worthy of your time. Beyond that, really the only way to play it is on MAME. Yeah, I mean, unless you're lucky enough, they did have it briefly in Arcade Club as a stand-up. I did play it back in the day quite a bit and enjoy, but yeah, no, the reality is MAME is your only option unless you're lucky enough to still see it in the wild. Okay, let's go on to number 54, and I've gone for Wacky Races. This was developed and published by Infogrames and is a kart racer, released in 2000 for the Sega Dreamcast. Now, it did see a later release on the PS2, but for whatever reason, it's awful on the PS2. I can't recommend it, so I would just say stick with the original, the Sega Dreamcast. Here you get to control, of course, you know, all those. For those who don't know, Wacky Races was a Hanna-Barbera cartoon all about racing, so it fits perfectly with the genre. And of course, you know, you get to play Dick Dastardly eventually, not Right Out of Hand and Muttley. They were the bad guys, but you get to play all the others like Penelope, Pit Stop, and all the Cavemans and other characters. It's just a delightful game. It does such an amazing job. This, of course, was Gremlin in all but name. That's when they'd been bought by Infogrames. And, of course, essentially Sumo Digital is Gremlins today. So they've always had a long-running history with good racing games, and they showed it here. I remember being blown away by this game. The cell shading I'd never seen done so well as I saw with this game. It really felt like a cartoon come to life. And, yeah, I still love love it and enjoy it today. And of course, if you can't find the original game, I would say probably go for the Redream emulator. I should note as well, I will give a little mention, there is a Wacky Races arcade game that has also come out by Bandai Namco. That is a fantastic racing game. It's a great update. I'd recommend it highly. I've been lucky enough to see it in the wild, but you can play it on Techno Parrot emulator, so that's another way of enjoying it. But either way, Wacky Races, Dreamcast and the arcade need to be played by more. Right, okay, let's go on to number 53, and I've gone for Virtua Racing. Virtua Racing was published and developed by Sega. Yes, it's another Sega racing game, and it came out in 1992. And this was really, really impressive back in the day because it was one of the early pioneers of using fast 3D polygonal graphics. You had things like hard driving and stuff like that before, but this really took the fast speeds and really just impressed. It was a really expensive cab back in the day, arcade cabinet. Of course, got supplanted pretty quick as technology went leaps and bounds, and it wasn't long before you had other 3D racing games that came along, and of course, notably, by the time games, when it did texture mapping, that took it to another level again, like Daytona and things. But I still have a special place in my heart for it. It was a big deal back in the day and still a big deal. These days you can buy on quite a few of the modern consoles, not the Xbox annoyingly, but certainly Switch and PS4. You can get the Sega Ages Virtua Racing. Brilliant update. It just improves the speed of the game, the frame rate, to make sure it runs silky smooth. Outside of that, the Saturn port's pretty good, and the Mega Drive does an amazing job on its home port. And of course you can play it on MAME, but yeah, probably even if you have like a MAME setup, I would play the Sega Ages on the new machines. Usually you can get it for next to nothing if you catch it in a sale, and it's just simply the best way of playing it, really. Okay, let's go on to number 52, and I have chosen Initial D Arcade Stage. This was developed and published by Sega again, and is based on the anime series Initial D. It's a manga and anime series, and it's all about the boy racer and car and all the usual sort of trappings that they go through. It's quite an interesting anime, really, but the game is really, really good. It came out in 2001, the one that I'm choosing, the arcade stage, but I don't know. I mean, any of them I would recommend. I mean, maybe Initial D Infinite, which is number 8, is the one that I see in Arcade Club in Bury. That's probably a great way of playing it. But they do have the arcade stage downstairs. Really, it's the same game, repeated and repeated, but with just better graphics. But I love the things thrown in these Initial D. The thing that differentiates this game is it's car one-on-one boy racing, typically, and you're going through Japanese sort of like locales and up in the mountains near Tokyo, and just some of the villages, and it just looks stunning. You feel in some capacity like you've visited Japan. That's great. It also has the wonderful cheesy music, which just is perfect and works with the game. And I love the little touches, like some of the levels if you're racing yourself, and it's got like a lo-fi way of showing how much you've been hitting the sides. It has a bucket of water, and the idea is that you race without dropping too much water by hitting the sides or sliding too much, giving a smooth ride. I think it's just a nice idea. Yeah, and I really love the Initial D games, and it's a real shame that apart from some of the early ones getting home ports, which were alright for their time, that Sega have again not done a home port of some of the later ones. I think it would be phenomenally successful, and it's just a shame that they don't give the games a chance. Okay, let's go on to number 51, and I've gone for Iron Man Stewart's Super Off-Road, developed by the Leyland Corporation and published by Virgin Games. Now, this is an arcade game, came out in 1989, and it's sort of known for having 3 simultaneous trucks can be played. There's 4 opponents, so one would be the computer, or you have up to 3. And it's just cool. I mean, it's basically like a update to Super Sprint, but it really gives you that off-road feel of the track, where it matters where you go on the track depending on the speed, so you don't want to go on vertical parts which will slow your truck down. It's got great upgrades as well. I mean, of course, it encourages you to spend more and more, but I just adore this. I mean, it's so much fun. They've got it in Arcade Club in Bury, and always try to play it with the friends that I'm with, and yeah, just play it to the end. Now, it did come also with some Super Pack DLC that added extra tracks, which sometimes you have added to the game. In terms of home ports, I mean, they had a lot of good home ports back in the day. The Amiga, SNES in particular, got great versions of it. Atari ST, obviously. They're all very, very solid. Probably the best way to legitimately play it would be way back on the Midway Arcade Treasures 3. This game is here, including the Super Pack DLC as well, so that's probably a great way. Failing that, you know, just picking it up in, well, playing it on MAME or just tracking it down. Again, sadly, it's one that never gets re-released these days because of, I guess, the licensing. Okay, let's go on to number 50, and I have gone for Manx TT Superbike. Yes, it's another Sega published and developed game, and it's an arcade racing game on a motorbike based on the Isle of Man TT motorcycle race. It came out in 1995, and it was known for its exciting sort of like 3D visuals. I mean, it just looks so cool as you're going through the back streets of Isle of Man, and you know, the winding streets, and past all these lovely country houses and the coast and all of that. It plays fantastically well, has amazing music also. I'll be honest, a lot of my memories is from the Sega Saturn port, which is absolutely stunning, really solid. And I prefer the Sega Saturn version even today. It's weird, the arcade version, which you can play on, you know, the sort of, I would say, the Sega Model emulator. I think Sega Model 1 probably. That's a great way of playing it, to be honest. But I find, as I find on the original machine, that I don't do very well. There's something I can't get the same level of speed. I'm clearly doing something daft, but I have played this. They did have it in Arcade Club in Blackpool, and yeah, I mean, and I've played it out in the wild on other cabinets, and I've just never had any success with doing very well. But clearly it's me. Either way, I love the game, and you know, probably the Sega Saturn would be the way I would suggest people to play it today, or play it on the Supermodel Sega emulator and enjoy it that way as well. Okay, let's go on to number 49, and I've chosen Lotus 3, The Ultimate Challenge. This was developed by Magnetic Fields and published by Gremlin Interactive, and released in 1993 for the Amiga and other platforms. Now, although I've said Lotus 3, The Ultimate Challenge, really this is for Lotus 1, Lotus 2 and Lotus 3. But I'm particularly calling out Lotus 3 because I think it's a misunderstood sequel. I personally think it is the best. Because it came out later, didn't hit the zeitgeist as much as the Lotus 2. Just a quick recap of the Lotus game. Lotus 1 was amazing, ahead of its time. The only sort of downside really with it was that you had like the letterbox, even in single player, the bottom of the screen was just like in the pit, so you never had sort of like a full screen racing. I still think that's probably one of the best games though, because the challenge and the championship was really, really good. Lotus 2, they decided to go more to the checkpoint outrun model, which I didn't think was as engaging, but one of the things that was great is it went full screen in your face, and that was tremendous. But I think apart from the intro music, it actually is the weakest of all the games. The in-game snippets of music isn't particularly good in my opinion. Just the Barry Leach opening music was fantastic, that everyone of course remembers. But with Lotus 3, it had all the advantages of the full screen, but it gave you the options of championship or checkpoints. It had the best of both worlds there. It had an amazing music roster, I think done by Patrick Phelan, and it had the third car. Well, there was the you had the Elan and Lotus Esprit, and basically a third futuristic car, concept car, and much more variety to the tracks. I've heard a lot of people that say it leaves them cold, but I think it's nostalgia. I think all of them need to be played, and I'm shouting out all of them on this number, but Lotus 3, rediscover it and see how you get on. Not for anything but the music and the variety of the tracks and weather effects. Okay, let's go on to number 48, and I've gone for San Francisco Rush 2049. This was published and developed by Atari Games and is an arcade racing game that came out in 1999. It has sort of like toy box physics of games, a bit like Cruising and all the ones that came around this sort of time, but this has you race a futuristic version of San Francisco. It has a lovely variety of tracks. There's lots of secrets and different ways to make your way through. Of course, you're in futuristic cars. It's just a lot of fun. I mean, it's basically those sort of cruising games, but done in the arcades with an alternative and futuristic. It had a brilliant Dreamcast port back in the day. That's one that I really played it the most. Also appeared on the Midway Arcade Treasures 3-pack, so dust that off and give that one a go as well. That also comes with the Alcatraz San Francisco Alcatraz pack as well. So just really, really good. Sadly, not one that you can legally find today that I'm aware of to buy on modern machines, and that's such a shame. But it does run okay on main. But probably these days, the Dreamcast, run it through Redream is probably the best way, because the home port has lots of extra content as well. Okay, let's go on to number 47, and I've gone for Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing Transformed, which is the sequel to Sega and Sonic All-Star Racing game. It's done by Sumo Digital, who did all those fantastic Outrun 2 home ports, and published by Sega. And it's a kart racing game, came out in 2012, has all the characters like Sonic the Hedgehog and Jet Set Radio and Panzer Dragoon and all the wonderful sort of like nods to Sega, and it's basically a Mario Kart clone. But the sequel tries to go a little bit different with the emphasis on transformation. So your vehicle will transform on water to a boat or a plane. And whilst I love the game, and I really do love the game, I find whilst a lot of the reviewers, that was the thing they actually preferred this over the original because it's trying to do something different to Mario Kart. It's probably the thing I liked the least. I found that on the water sections and the flying sections, I found it often you got confused and sort of it was easy to take wrong turns. But in many ways it's a minor problem because this is just an epic, wonderful game, particularly for a Sega nut like me. There's so many nods, and the music remastered of all these classic games, I think done by Rich Joseph. It's just brilliant. It needs to be played by more. The PC has a great home port. I think you can still buy it on Steam. Also came out obviously on the 360 and PS3, but obviously with the PC you get all the upscaled graphics. I'd recommend it on any of the systems really. Okay, let's go on to number 46, and we have Stunt Car Racer, developed by Jeff Crammond and published by Micro Style. Now this is a racing game developed in 1989 and came out on lots of platforms, but particularly on the Amiga and Atari ST is where I'm suggesting it. This was so ahead of its time with high-speed racing on elevated tracks, jumps and obstacles. And what was great is as you sort of like push the car to the limits, you'd see this crack appear that was your damage. And if you landed heavily, it would crack some more, and of course you'd destroy the car if the crack went all the way across. It was also really cool. You had a linked up mode where you could actually sort of race other real people, just well ahead of its time for 3D gaming, and it's really, really cool to play today. There is also a fan update called Stunt Car Racer TNT that you can get for the machines, and that's a great as well because it just adds more tracks basically to the Stunt Car roster. Now, they're not maybe as exciting as the original roster, they tend to be a bit flatter, but more about the racing. They're sort of geared towards racing other people and things like that. So yeah, I think it's just a wonderful game. It's one that's probably passed a lot of people who didn't have the Amiga or Atari ST by. Yeah, go back and enjoy this game. Okay, let's go on to number 45, and I've gone for R4 Ridge Racer Type 4, developed and published by Namco and came out in 1998 for the PlayStation 1. This really sort of was a generous undertaking. It took the other games in the series, all of which I love, like Ridge Racer and Rave Racer and all of this sort of stuff, but it sort of added so many cars and tracks and story-driven career mode. I mean, there was so much content that it no longer became just an arcade game, but a thing you could go back to again and again and progress your way through. I love going to it today and playing my way through. It looks fantastic on Duck Station emulator as well. It really is one of the standout titles on Ridge Racer series. It needs to be played by more. Okay, let's go on to Blur. This was number 44 and developed by Bizarre Creations. Yes, the people behind the Project Gotham series and games like that. And it was published by Activision. It was their first foray into racing games after leaving Microsoft. And what they did here was an arcade racing game that was essentially taking the idea of if Project Gotham and Mario Kart had a baby, what would it be? And it basically Blur. So it's sort of like realistic cars, fun racing mechanics, but you pick up the weapons like you do in like a Wipeout or Mario Kart, probably close to Wipeout actually in terms of visual style and the types of weapons. This was a fantastic classic in 2010. I loved it to bits. It came out on the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and PC, and I'm still kicking myself to this day that I didn't pick up the PC version because you can no longer buy it because of licensing, which is such a shame. But I do own it on the PS3 and Xbox 360, and one day I'll find a copy of the PC, although they go for stupid money sadly these days. I'd love to see a remaster. It's one of the things I was hoping Microsoft would consider doing once they acquired Activision, but they don't seem interested in the Project Gotham or Activision racing games, which fries my brain. Hopefully they will change that, because quite frankly I'm just one of the people that don't really like their Forza Horizons, if I'm honest. I don't find it as good as everybody makes it out to be. Yeah, but stick with Blur. It's got vibrant graphics, engaging multiplayer modes, and great locations as well. It's great racing in places like Brighton and things like that, some of the UK places, which is kind of cool that you don't normally see places like that in racing games. Talking of great racing games, let's go to number 43, and I've gone for Need for Speed The Run. This was developed by EA Black Box and published by EA themselves, and came out in 2011 for multiple platforms, including the PS3, Xbox 360 and PC. Now, this was much maligned back in the day. It's probably the most poorly reviewed, certainly in this period. Some of the later ones are pretty atrocious of Need for Speed that have just come out, but it was probably the ones considered the worst by reviewers, and I totally disagree. Yes, it has this sort of shoehorn story-driven mode with quick action bits at the beginning, which are completely unnecessary, take you out of the action and shouldn't be there, I grant you. But get past those bits, and there isn't that many that you do. It's all at the front end, annoyingly. But get past that and you've got a really good across America racing game with beautiful visuals, lots of variety, and there's something about that racing across America and seeing that progression and wanting to see the next parts as you go from coast to coast that I just love about the game. It's one that I always go back to, particularly on the 360, and I just think it needs to be played by more. It's just such a shame because it was so poorly received by reviewers back in the day. A lot of people look the other way and haven't either tried it, or one of the Need for Speeds you cannot buy today, sadly. never probably get a remaster, put it that way. Okay, let's go on to number 42, and I've chosen Road Rash, but the 32-bit edition. This came out originally on the 3DO, that's where it was first released, but it did see PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn a little bit later. And I love this version. It's got cutscenes and all the cheesiness of that. It's also got CD soundtrack, which is really cool, of a lot of the great sort of like thrash and rock bands of the day, heavy metal and things like that. But yeah, it's just gameplay wise, it's actually really, really fun. It's basically Road Rash with nicer graphics, and you sort of make your way through much more visually impressive levels. Obviously, I love the Road Rash series and its charms, and I still prefer the original Road Rash, but this is one that I think people need to go back to. If you love the Road Rash games, this is one that's probably passed a lot of people by, and it needs to be played by more. Okay, let's go on to number 41, and I've chosen H2 Overdrive. This was developed by Specular Interactive and published by Raw Thrills. And basically, this is the sequel to Hydro Thunder that we never got. Although there was Hydro Thunder Hurricane on the 360, which was awesome as well. I love all the ones in the series, but this love letter to it is a great update by Raw Thrills, and came out in 2009, only in the arcades. Sadly, never seen a home port, and why Raw Thrills don't do home ports of many of their games is just heartbreaking to me. I was so hopeful when they did Cruising on the Switch, but sadly not the Xbox. I was really hoping they would sort of continue that forward with other games that they've done, but sadly not. But what you have here is basically over the top, in a boat, all about finding and picking up the boosts and making your way through some really madcap waterway tracks, not taking it too seriously like the Hydro Thunder did as well, not taking itself too seriously, and plays fantastically well. I've been lucky enough to play it in the arcades. For a time it was in Blackpool in the actual sort of like PSC front, so I've been able to play it a few times there. Thankfully, Technoparrot emulator does do this in the home, so if you're so inclined, that's a way to do it. It's one that I really hope that either Arcade Club or Retro Realm or one of those places will pick one up, put in, because I think it'll be hugely popular. Okay, let's go on to number 40, and I've chosen 18-wheeler American Pro Trucker. This was developed and published by Sega and came out in 2000. I probably, back in the day, played it more on the Dreamcast because it was difficult to see it in the arcades, which was almost like for like the Dreamcast port. But the arcade edition is thankfully an arcade club in Bury, so I've been able to play it there. And, you know, this was unique because rather than race big cars, you controlled big truck rigs and you go across American landscapes, and you're going up against very tight timescales as you try and make your way against rival truckers. Yeah, it's just really, really engaging and fun. Just a unique experience and well worthy of your time. I want to give a special note out to the sequel because a lot of people don't realise that there's actually a Sega developed sequel called King of the Road 66, and this is using the same engine. Sadly never saw a home port, but has much better tracks and racing to make your way through. Okay, let's go on to number 39, and I've chosen Storm Racer. This was developed by Wildlap Technology and is an arcade racing game that is really unique. I mean, it plays fantastically well. It's got an amazing soundtrack, an absolutely stunning soundtrack, exhilarant gameplay, just really good tracks. It's a real hidden arcade racing gem that most people don't know about. I mean, I've never been lucky enough to see it in the wild. I've seen it for sale and, you know, online as some like home leisure direct, and dreamt of being a millionaire and being able to buy it. But I love it. I mean, the way I came to it was in Technoparrot has this and able to emulate it perfectly, so that's probably the best way to enjoy it for most people. But this is one that I would love to see more places like Arcade Club or Retro Realm sort of introduced because it's a great racing game. The only slight downside you could argue with it is it's like many of the others games, it's quite limited in the number of tracks, but every single track is a complete joy. Talking of joy, hidden gems, let's go to number 38, which is Splashdown 2 Rides Gone Wild. This came out in 2003 and was developed by Rainbow Studios and published by THQ. Now you play a jet ski racing game, but what makes this stand above the first game or games like Wave Racer and things like that, which I love, and they all have a place. But I wanted to shout out Splashdown above all of those games for the very reason that whilst it has all the performance stunts and tricks of those games, what it has is really, really madcap, interesting tracks. One point you're going on the Bermuda Triangle and you get whipped into sort of like history with all these crashed ships and things like that, and then you're back, or you're up against seeing dinosaurs of like Jurassic Park robots going wrong. Yeah, I probably don't want to spoil any more than that, but it's just every level is well thought out, and it's different each lap you do, so there's always a feeling of fun as you make your way through. Definitely needs to be played by more. As I say, I believe it only came out on the PlayStation 2, so you can play it on the emulator. It's one that I'm hoping actually has improved over time. Last time I tried on the PlayStation emulator, it had a lot of graphical glitches, unfortunately. But you can pick this up for pennies. I mean, I think I picked it up on the PlayStation 2 original in the box for like £2-3, including postage. I mean, this is what's wonderful about a lot of these hidden gems, whereas other genres, you end up having to pay a fortune. Racing games, for whatever reason, isn't well regarded. People just want the latest graphics, and therefore you can usually pick up these old games for next to nothing, which is no complaints from me. Right, okay, let's go on to number 37, and I've gone for Diddy Kong Racing, developed and published by Rare, and of course coming out on the N64. Came out in 1997, and it had all the characters from the Donkey Kong universe and Donkey Kong Country. What was great about this, it had so much more variety over the games like Mario Kart that it was sort of aping. You can be in karts, hovercrafts, planes, so many tracks, things to collect, story adventure modes. There's just so much content, and of course all with that Rare charm that you had at their peak. I mean, it's so sad that they've never really recreated that since they were bought by Porsche, in my opinion. Yeah, I think it's a really solid kart racing game and needs to be played by more. Okay, let's go on to number 36, and I've chosen Scars, SCARS. Don't ask me what it stands for, I can't remember. But it's developed by Vivid Image and published by Ubisoft. In the game, it's another futuristic racing game. Came out in 1998 for most of the systems, PlayStation and Nintendo 64. I would probably say play it on PlayStation just purely because DuckStation does a great job of upscaling everything. Play whichever one you remember. I guess where this was slightly different is each vehicle was sort of inspired by different animals, and therefore you had unique abilities and attributes. I love it. It's got great music, wonderful variety of tracks, interesting power-ups and weapons to take out the opponents, and just fast-paced gameplay, and I just find it a really engaging racing experience. And it's another one that I think it's fallen out of memory with a lot of people. They tend to sort of skip over what they think about racing games, so I wanted to shout it out here. Okay, let's go on to number 35, and I've gone for Radical Bikers, developed and published by Galico, and that's not Jalico, but the one with the G, and is it Spanish, I think? And it's an arcade racing game released in 1998 where you're a pizza delivery chap who must go through the busy streets to make it before the rival company on your scooter and just make it to deliver the pizza. It's a really unique concept, sort of taking ideas of like Crazy Taxi but with a singular location and racing to get there first. Has wonderful cheesy music. I absolutely adore this game. It's one that I've never unfortunately been lucky enough to see in the arcades, which is such a shame. It's one that I think think Arcade Club or Retro Realms would do well in introducing people to this game. I believe Antstream, I know that Antstream did the Game Boy Color version. They might have done the PS1 port of this, so that's where they're playing, because the PS1 port is not half bad. You can play it on DuckStation. Failing that, you can play it on MAME. I think it runs reasonably well if you've got a respect enough machine, but Technoparrot runs it perfectly and it's on there as well, so that's a great way of playing it. But yeah, you need to play this. This skipped a lot of people by. Incidentally, as I mentioned, the Game Boy Color version, that's like an isometric affair, totally different game, same concept, but actually surprisingly fun to play. But yeah, there's many ways of sort of enjoying this game. Okay, let's go on to number 34, and I've gone for Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. I could have chosen Hot Pursuit 2 equally as well, but no, we'll go with the first one, which was developed by Criterion Games and published by Electronic Arts. This came out in 2010. It came out on all the machines back in the day, the PS3, Xbox 360 and PC. It was also relatively recently remastered, so you know that's probably what I've chosen, Hot Pursuit, because the remaster is fantastic as well. This gave the concept of sort of like either being the racers or police chasing the racers. Depending on each bit of the game, you would do either be the racer or the police trying to capture racers, and you know it's really engaging and lots of like multiplayer events and things you can do, which is just one that I really enjoy going back to. In fact, I really need to sort of put more time into the remaster. I sort of put it down because other games came along, but need to really go back to it. It's so good. It still holds up fantastically well today. Right, okay, let's go on to number 33, and I've gone for one that maybe a lot of people have not heard of. It is Downhill Domination, developed by Incognito Entertainment and published by Sony. It's a mountain bike game that you're going down the mountain. I mean, it just is so exciting to play and so engaging and so unique. It came out in 2003, only for the PS2. I just love the downhill tracks, unique challenges. It just plays so unique compared to a lot of racers, and just so exciting as you're going full pelt down the mountain, really feeling it if you go send your poor cyclist into one of the trees or one of the obstacles. But yeah, I just can't stop playing it. It's fantastic, and it's another one that emulates very well on the PS2 emulator, so it's a great way of playing it. But this was another one that I picked up for pennies. I think it was another £3 game that I just picked up on eBay because a lot of people don't have the desire to go back with racing games, and it's a real shame because Downhill Domination is a real classic. Please, you know, give this game a go. Okay, let's go on to number 32. And I've gone for Vanishing Point, developed by Clockwork Games and published by Acclaim Entertainment. Came out in 2001 for the PlayStation 1 and Dreamcast. I probably remember the Dreamcast more back in the day, but going back to it, I don't know, with DuckStation and how it upscales things, I'm more inclined to go for the PlayStation these days. I don't know, it was just a really good game. It had great arcadey but slightly realistic handling, wonderful vehicle dynamics, and you can race through so many tracks. There's so many wonderful variety of tracks with terrains and challenges. There's so much to the game that I just keep going back to. It's one that we covered it in one of our podcast episodes, and yeah, it always goes to the top of my list of games to enjoy and play. Right, okay, let's go on to number 31, and I've gone for Metropolis Street Racer, or MSR. It's done by Bizarre Creations and published by Sega, and this was the original game that became Project Gotham. Basically, when Sega went tits up with the Dreamcast, they sold Bizarre Creations, or Bizarre Creations agreed to go across, and they were bought by Microsoft and then continued the idea of MSR, but with a different name because they couldn't bring it across, so they called it Project Gotham. This came out in 2000. It was quite a delayed game for the Dreamcast. It's a real shame because this had so much that was so ahead of its time. I mean, first of all, it's set in real-world locations of London, Tokyo and San Francisco, and so that was amazing. I've never seen that level of detail. But it also has wonderful music, radio for each of those locations with great tunes, but also the radio disc jockey sort of talking in the relative language. You could choose between different radio stations. It's just so cool. But of course, the other factor was the kudos system was so ahead of its time. It kind of rewarded people for how you raced. It wasn't just getting first, but you would lose kudos if you bashed into other cars on walls, or you gain kudos for doing like cool slipstreaming and then overtaking people in a cool way, or doing a great sort of like skidding turn. I really miss the Project Gotham games and Metropolis Street Racer, and likewise. I played this to death on my Dreamcast back in the day, and it's one that I think still holds up fantastically well. I love the music of MSR, and yeah, it just needs to be played by more, quite frankly. Okay, let's go on to number 30. We're cracking through these, and this is one that a lot of people probably have not played, which is Sega Race TV at number 30, and it's developed and published by Sega. It's an arcade racing game, came out in 2008, and really was one of the last Sega arcade racing games in a lot of ways, certainly of the old school of style of racing. And it was the last racing game that Yu Suzuki had some involvement with. Because he was brought on as consultant for the game and also helped produce it. And this is so good. It's got colourful graphics. The whole concept is it's sort of like imagine a racing TV show, so you've got all your hosts sort of like chatting away about what's happening in the exciting racing action. It's all about finding the boost and bashing the boost button to make your way through interesting tracks. Of course limited, but I think there's only like 4 or 5 tracks in the game, but each one is beautifully shown, and of course there's a variety of different characters that you can choose as you make your way through. I adore this game, and particularly I've probably come to it more because Retro Realm in Warsaw actually has a 2-player sit-down arcade cabinet of this, and I'm so excited. This has been on my list to play on original hardware in the arcades for a long time, so to see it suddenly pretty much on my doorstep has made me very, very excited, and I've played it to death and completed it several times already every time I go there. You could also get it on Techno Parrot. That's a great way of also picking it up. It does great emulation of it as well. Although I seem to remember Techno Parrot does crash at the end, so you don't get to do the last track. They might have fixed that since, but either way, Sega Race TV is one of Sega's finest racing games that needs to be played by more. Okay, let's go on to number 29, and I've gone for another one that I adore. It is Cruising USA, developed by Midway Games, and it was done in collaboration with Nintendo, and on its release this was really special in the arcades. It had that wonderful sort of like toy box physics, but you're also racing across America in a variety of mad different cars that you can sort of race with, have wonderful music, and I just love this game. I love the progression of going across America gives. I love the mad music. I love the toy box physics. I would say any of the cruising games are probably worthy of your time. The N64 had a good home port, particularly if you upscale it, it runs a lot smoother. It was a bit of a disappointment at the time because they promised to be arcade perfect, which it clearly wasn't. But the N64 and the arcades also saw Cruising World, which took it travelling the world, same concept, and Cruising Exotica, which went underwater and in space and a variety of other places. But I think there's just something wonderful about the Cruising USA that just has a purity about it that I really engaged. Of course, they've recently, Raw Thrills, have re-engaged the name and has done like Cruising, the arcade game in Raw Thrills, and that's a fantastic one to play as well, which thankfully they did release. It's the only Raw Thrill games I believe they've released, which came out on the Switch. I really wish they made it available on the Xbox and PS4 and 5, but they didn't. But having said that, I love them all. But Cruising USA you can play on main. It's probably the best way to play the arcade original. Sadly, they never ever released it, which I think is a crying shame. Okay, let's go on to number 28, and we have Hydro Thunder. Hydro Thunder was developed by Midway Games and published by Midway in the arcades. This was the original sort of like high-speed racing powerboats through water-based tracks. It just had mad leveled designs, didn't take itself too seriously. Toy box physics, all about finding boosters and ways to give yourself the advantage. Still plays amazingly well. I mean, this did have some great home ports back in the day on the N64 and particularly on the Dreamcast. I mean, the Dreamcast was one that I particularly loved and played back in the day. It was even better than the, I think PS1 had one as well. I would probably play the home port over the arcade today purely because it has more content and runs better. So probably the Redream emulator and play Hydro Thunder is probably the best way to come back to this gem of the game. Incidentally, the Xbox 360 digitally had a sequel to Hydro Thunder that a lot of people don't know about, called Hydro Thunder Hurricane, and that is also fantastic and well worthy of play. And I believe you might be able to still buy it on the new Xboxes as well. I never looked because I sort of picked it up, but yeah, I'm pretty sure I can play it on my, certainly play it because I bought it on the 360 on the latest Xbox as well. So great ways of playing. And of course, as I mentioned, sort of higher up on the list, H2 Overdrive is a love letter as well. So there's lots of sort of like boat arcade racing action for you to enjoy. Right, okay, we're coming on to number 27, and it is Dirty Driving. This is one that loads of people don't know about. It's another specular interactive. Yeah, people who did H2 Overdrive and published by Raw Thrills again. This came out in 2011. I really love this. It's sort of in trucks, but Mario Kart. So imagine toy box physics and just fun racing, but Mario Kart elements. You pick up power-ups and you can take out the enemies. Absolute pandemonium and fun action set to amazingly over-the-top and interesting tracks. I love as well that the on the arcade, the actual way of doing the power-up is you yank the crank. They've got a skull embossed sort of like metal stick that you pull down to do the destruction of whatever power up you have. In between levels, to encourage you to put more money in and do the next level, you get the yank the crank bonus mode, which when you yank the crank, it's basically like a fruit machine type thing, and you see what you won, and that will give you a power up or some addition as you progress through. I love the game. It's one that I think Arcade Club or Retro Realms would do really well getting a copy of this. I think it would be hugely popular because a lot of people don't know this game. Thankfully you can pick it up and play it on Techno Parrot emulator, because it's yet another Raw Thrills that never saw a home release. It breaks my heart that Raw Thrills has done so many amazing games and they just sit in the arcades. It's clearly an ethos, and who am I to judge, because it clearly works for them. I mean, you go into an arcade in the wild these days and they're full of Raw Thrill games and not much else. They clearly know what they're doing, I guess, by not bringing it to their home ports, but it is what it is. Okay, let's go on to number 26, and I've chosen Super Hang-On. Yes, developed and published by Sega and another Yu Suzuki classic. This is an arcade motorcycle racing game. It came out in 1987, probably needs no introduction. Of course, the sequel to the 1985 Hang-On game, but what this does is give better graphics, more variety of levels as you make your way through whichever parts of the world, but also a turbo booster that's really, really cool that lets you sort of go faster and make your way through. I adore this game. I love the music. It's got amazing tunes. I find it so engaging and addictive to play. There has been like digital ways of getting Super Hang-On over the years. So there's different ways of sort of enjoying the game from like the 360 era. I remember it came out digitally. It's one that plays, of course, fantastic on main. But yeah, I really wish Sega would officially release more of their back catalogue, because I think it needs to be done. They seem to neglect or not want to recognise how important they were to the arcade racing genre. I mean, they could easily do a compilation pack of all their racing classics alone. Yeah, I adore it. There is Super Hang-On stand-up version that is an arcade club in Bury. I think I've heard in Leeds there might be the sit-down Super Hang-On cab, which is awesome as well. Just to note, the Super Hang-On limited edition actually makes it a little bit easier and has a lot of tweaks and improvements over the original game. Just subtle ones, but you know, if you're looking on main and you're looking which one to play, they're probably a limited edition. Super Hang-On is the one to go with, in my opinion. Okay, let's go on to the 25. I can't believe we're on the last quarter already, and it is Road Rash, developed and published by Electronic Arts, and this was such a wonderful motorcycle racing, punching, kicking game that came out in 1991 for the Sega Genesis, and you know, I remember playing it on the Amiga to death as well. It's just a fantastic game. You know, you're racing across America, you're making, you know, to win money and get better bikes. And what was of course unique with it was that you were allowed to race and fight dirty, so you could punch the other riders off the bike, but they could do it to you. And some of the other riders would have weapons like chains and things, but if you timed it right, you could catch a weapon off them, whether it's a baton or whatever, and then you had a weapon to bash the others. But the other thing it did a really good job of is introducing you to the roster of racing characters. You know, there was Natasha, the girl racer that you sort of fancied as a teenage kid, or Biff, who was the one that always sort of cheated and things like that. But there were just such a unique collection of eclectic racers that stood in your mind and really made you feel like you were racing other people rather than just sort of like soulless AI drones. I love them. I mean, I've obviously chosen the first one for what it stood for and how important it was, but Road Rash 2 expanded on it, to be honest, a little bit more, so maybe Road Rash 2 is worthy of the time. Road Rash 3, I didn't get on with the graphics as much. They sort of made it look uglier, went way more from pixel generated, but it was a very good game. But I love them all, but Road Rash 1 it had to be. Obviously you can play this on a Mega Drive emulator, and you know, relatively cheaply you can buy it on original hardware as well, so you know, buy the original cart. Okay, let's go on to number 24, and I've gone for F-Zero GX. This was developed by Amusement Vision, which is Sega, but published by Nintendo. I mean, how cool is that? Sega and Nintendo working together to create a sequel for the F-Zero series. Came out in 2003, and obviously you had the AX Arcade Edition, but I've chosen the GX, which was that came out on the GameCube, because it gives so much more content over the AX Arcade Edition. And to be honest, if you complete the GameCube version, which is very difficult to do, I'm not going to lie, you actually get as an unlockable the AX version, the arcade version as well. And it is like for like, really. I mean, I love the F-Zero series, and to be honest, this is a proxy to all the F-Zeros. I mean, I nearly could have chosen F-Zero X on the N64, it was amazing, the original F-Zero, and even the ones on the GBA are brilliant as well. But I've gone for GX because it's a really beautiful, fast-paced, gorgeous update to the F-Zero series, and I think it's shameful that Nintendo, for whatever reason, has completely neglected F-Zero, or even re-releasing a remaster of this F-Zero GX would be amazing. It would be printing money as far as I'm concerned, and I can't understand why Nintendo continually neglect the F-Zero series. Hopefully they're holding out for the Switch 2 to be a temporary release, but fingers crossed. Okay, we're on number 23, and I've chosen Buggy Boy, developed by Tatsumi and published by Tatsumi in some regions, or Data East in America. This is great. I mean, in America it was known as Speed Buggy, bit of a strange name, but the West and for the rest of Europe we knew it as Buggy Boy, which is a far better name. But I adore this game. It's a off-road racing game where you play a buggy. Came out in 1985 with 5 different tracks of off-road, northeast, south and west. But what was great about it, really, it's an obstacle course with you against the clock. Yes, there are other cars on the road, but it's really working your way around to negotiate the track in the best way possible. There's little jumps and things that makes it exciting, but it's about the flags and the ability to pick up score. It's a real score junkies game if you play it that way. I mean, I tend to play it for the racing and getting to the end, but there's so many nuances as you make your way through, and if you pick up the flags in the right order, you get additional bonus. All the flags start flashing and there's a wonderful little ditty tune, and you pick up those. It's one that I always go back to. Sadly, it's only on it had some great home ports. I mean, brilliant on the C64 and the Amiga. The Amiga's my favourite, the one that I truly fell in love with, Buggy Boy. Sadly, yes, it's on MAME, but it's really difficult to get working right. I mean, you can, after a lot of tweaking, get it kind of working, but it's just so difficult to play the arcade original. Thankfully, in Arcade Club in Bury, they do have the Speed Buggy, the US version, stand-up, so just the junior. But it's a dream of mine to play again Buggy Boy 3 screen. The deluxe one had 3 screens, which is really the way to play it. And I was a kid the last time I was lucky enough to see it, and unfortunately I've missed the retro events where they've had it. I mean, somebody in the UK in the retro scene does own 3-screen Buggy Boy, and it's such a shame I've never been able to get there. But there you go. So we're doing well. That's up to 23. Let's move on to 22. Okay, let's go on to number 22, and it's Split Second is the one that I've gone for, developed by Black Rock Studios and published by Disney Interactive Studios. This is the same team that also did those fantastic Cars games, which are also good arcade racing games to mention. But this came out in 2010 for multiple platforms like PS3 and Xbox 360 and on the PC, and it's one that you can still pick up today on modern consoles. Certainly on the Xbox, I'm sure it's the same in the PS4. You can pick it up for next to nothing, and it's a fantastic racing game that needs to be played by more. One of the unique things with the racing game of this is it's basically aping a game show, as it were. So as you're racing through, they'll set off timed explosions, so you have buildings collapsing around you as you have to negotiate your way through, and it just sort of takes it to another level. What was already a fantastically exciting racing game, to have that sort of like changing landscape of the track and all this explosions and things happening at a moment's notice just keeps you on edge and excited throughout. I adore this game. It's one that I really need to spend some proper time. Maybe one of the things I'm planning to do with this arcade top 100 list that I've compiled that you're watching now is I did it mostly for myself, because I wanted to remind myself what are the games that I truly love, the arcade racing games. And I'm planning to sort of, as a personal little project, just for myself, play my way through every one of these games through to completion, because all of them are worthy of certainly my time and I believe yours. So feel free to join me on going through these classic games as I am, and explore what they are for you. I mean, if it helps you discover or gets you to replay some of these classic gems again, I think that's awesome. Okay, let's go on to number 21, and I've chosen Micro Machines Turbo Tournament. Now, obviously I love all the Micro Machine games, including a lot of the 3D ones, but I've chosen Turbo Tournament in particular because it was developed, like all, they were developed by Codemasters, but the 1984 one had built into the cart the extra connectors, so it made it exciting, and it had that multiplayer element which really elevated the game even further. I love them on both. I mean, the Sega Mega Drive version with the extra ports is one that I particularly hold dear, but the Super Nintendo Entertainment System on the SNES also does a fantastic job. I really miss Micro Machines, and it's such a shame that the concept of riding those little toy cars across some landscapes is sort of like there hasn't been up-to-date ones. I mean, there was a attempt to release, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago maybe, and it wasn't very good. It was trying to nickel and dime you, and it was missing a lot of content, whereas the originals was all about fun and enjoyment. And I just think it's so great, being able to be a boat or a little car and making your way through. And I will say, actually, some of the 3D variants on the PS1 are equally worthy of your time as well. But out of all of them, I think the Turbo Tournament, with the emphasis on multiplayer, which is really where this game shines, is the one to choose as a proxy for the entire series. Okay, we're on the final 20 now, and I've chosen Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition at number 20. This was developed by Rockstar San Diego and, of course, published by Rockstar Games. And, I really miss Rockstar when they used to do other games other than Grand Theft Auto. And it does worry me, to be honest, that they put all their eggs in one basket rather than what they used to do, which is release other games. This is one that I would love them, returning to. Of course, it's a street racing game. It came out in 2005 on the PS2, Xbox, and also the PSP as well. It's one, thankfully, that, well, some of the Midnight Club series that came in 360 you can play on the latest hardware, but this is really the one to play, and thankfully the PS2, using the PS2 emulator, upscales it beautifully. It's got great hip-hop music, if that's what you like, sort of rapping music, which I love. It's set in real world cities like Detroit, Atlanta, San Diego, and I don't know, I just really enjoy this game. Yes, it does have the open world exploration bit, which kind of falls slightly outside my narrow definition of an arcade racer, but there's just something about this game. I find it accessible and fun enough. And maybe it's just when it came out, I was at the age where I had more patience with games like this, and therefore it's stuck with me and I love it as much today. Yeah, the Xbox, if you can get a copy of it, is probably the best version to play on real hardware. But yeah, PS2 emulation is rock solid, and it's probably the best way if you have a good enough gaming PC to play it on. Right, okay, let's go on to number 19, and I have chosen Beetle Adventure Racing with an exclamation mark. This is developed by Paradigm Entertainment and published by Electronic Arts. And it came out in 1999 and only for the N64. And it's such a shame it only came out on the N64 because a lot of people pass them by. I mean, it only has the Volkswagen Beetle, hence the name, and you're racing against. But what's great about this is the variety of tracks and diverse routes that you can take. You can ride through barns. There's so many shortcuts to discover. So much location differences. There's jungles, cities, mountains. So much content and things that are hidden away and things you can pick up that just gives so much replay value to the game. I adore it, and whilst on the original N64, through a CRT it looks really, really good. But of course, with N64 emulation, you can upscale it and it looks even better, along with fantastic music. I haven't even mentioned the music really. This is one that I think passed a lot of people by, and it's a real shame. It needs to be played by more. You'll be addicted, and you'll hopefully thank me if you're new to this Beetle Adventure Racing that I introduced you to it. It's a real, I won't say hidden gem, but if you don't know it, because it passed a lot of people by, it'll be a surprise and a pleasant one for you. Okay, let's go on to number 18, and I've chosen Superbikes 2, developed and published by Raw Thrills, and this is a 2010 arcade racer. It's basically when they did their Fast and the Furious, and they then switched to supercars and things like that. It's the same concept as what they did with cruising games, the original cruising games like Cruising USA. Toy box physics, mad gameplay, exciting over-the-top locations and stunts you can perform. And Superbikes 2 is brilliant because, of course, you can pull off the stunts and things like that. It's got great bikers that you can take on, like a Terminator 2 referenced bike, or like a Robocop on a bike. It's like a futuristic bike. I just love it. I love all the Raw Thrill renditions, as I did back when they started doing things on Cruising USA. I just love the entire series, and I think it's right to choose Superbikes 2 because it's really the last one that they did of the Superbikes, and therefore it just had the first one but with more tracks, so more content, more things to enjoy, and that's why I chose it here. Sadly, it's another one that never saw a home port. You can, however, you often see it in the arcades dotted around, or Techno Parrot does have it as well, so that's another way of enjoying this game. One that I hope that Arcade Club or Retro Realm bring to their wonderful collections, because I think it will be another really popular one. Okay, let's go on to number 17, and in the vein of the last one, it's got to be Supercars. This is also done by Raw Thrills and came out in 2011, so again, this is like the Fast and the Furious games that they did, which I love, and you can play the Fast and the Furious in Retro Realm, which is wonderful. They got it on free play. But Supercars is when they lost the Fast and the Furious license. They just expanded. It's got better graphics, more locations, and they just upped the locations and things you could see and do with each version. So Supercars in that regard is like the best. The amount of places that you can race on the motor tracks is the pinnacle, really. It's one that you occasionally see out in the wild in arcades. I mean, it's usually been superseded these days by Cruising, like the later Cruising games, for the right reasons. But if you do see Supercars 2, track it down and give it a play. It's another one that Techno Parrot does emulate perfectly in the home, so that's another good way of playing it. But I'm really hopeful this is another one that I think will be hugely popular in Arcade Club or Retro Realm. So, it's one that I think people would really enjoy and love. Okay, let's go on to number 16. We're getting there, and I've chosen Wipeout 3, the Special Edition. This was developed by Psygnosis and published by Sony. It came out in 2000, so quite a late release, really, for the PS1. The reason I've chosen the 3 Special Edition is because this only came out in Europe, I believe, and it had not only Wipeout 3, but a lot of the tracks from 2049, the second one, but with Wipeout 3 engine. So you get the best of everything, really. I love the Wipeout series. I wanted to shout out Wipeout 3 Special Edition because, you can pick it up relatively cheap. And if you get it, play it on like a duck station, it upscales beautifully. Now I will say, like some of the other Wipeouts, like the HD remaster on the PS4 is probably the best way to play it. But I wanted to, today, of that kind of series, but I just wanted to shout out that there was the special edition. There's ways of enjoying Wipeout without having to shell out for a PS4. Okay, we're on the final 15, and for number 15 I've chosen Chase HQ, developed and published by Taito. This is an amazing 1988 racing cop game, and really introduced that idea of sort of like chasing after the criminals, and then you basically bash into them within the time limit to knock and do enough damage to make them sort of like stop and crash, and allows you to then apprehend them and capture them, moving on to the next criminal. Yeah, I just love everything about it. The music, the Nancy at headquarters. Of course, it had some beautiful home ports, particularly on the Spectrum and things like that, and obviously the PC Engine. But yeah, it's just brilliant, to play this again. Sadly, it only ever really officially got released on Taito Legends in the PS2 Xbox generation, and I find that such a shame because Chase HQ is so wonderful. I mean, you can obviously play it through MAME, but I find MAME is not very good at getting the controls suitable for a standard joystick. I mean, they should really work on things like that, in my opinion, to make it more accessible, because a lot of these games don't feel quite right in the home because of that. But yeah, I mean, MAME's probably your best bet, but my word, You know, we've had 3 Taito Milestone collections now on the Switch and PS4, not on the Xbox annoyingly, and yeah, they haven't included so many Taito classics. It's really frustrating. They're just so miserly and all about making money rather than preservation these days, which is such a shame. But let's go on to number 14, and I've chosen Indy 500. This is the Sega one, not the one from the 70s or variety of ones, but it is the arcade racing game they did in 1995, and it's one that I think passed a lot of people by. I was lucky enough to play this on the real arcade in one of the retro events I attended. Only ever saw it once, so. And this is one of Sega's best arcade races. It's absolutely fantastic. You know, it obviously recreates the famous Indianapolis 500 race, but so much more, the Motor Speedway. But it's just got that wonderful sense of speed with the blurring that it does. It goes super ridiculously fast, and it's so exciting as a result. In many ways, I do, you know, on a different day I probably prefer it to Daytona. Horses for courses, sometimes I prefer which one of each, but yeah, I just think this is amazing. You can play it on the Sega Model 2, I believe, emulator, and that's probably the best way to play it, because sadly this is another Sega game that never has had a home port, which I think is so disappointing. I just wish Sega would like dust off their back catalogue. They've got so many classic games. And maybe they will. I mean, it sounds like they're trying to go the subscription model. Maybe they'll introduce in that Netflix, Nintendo online style thing to nickel and dime you on a subscription. They'll probably, hopefully, release a wider catalogue. Who knows? But they might struggle with Indy 500 because of the licensing. Okay, let's go on to number 13, and I've chosen Mario Kart 8. This, of course, was developed and published by Nintendo. Probably needs no introduction, but I've gone for the 2014 8 edition that came out, you know, Wii U and later on the Switch. It's Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. They're pretty much the same game. I think the Switch version is the one to play. I found sometimes the Wii U struggled a bit. Now, with Mario Kart, it's weird. I mean, really, this is a proxy for all the Mario Kart games, and the reason I chose the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is because of all the DLC that you can buy. It's the most generous in terms of going back to all the other Mario Karts in one place with the tracks you can do. But, you know, I mean, I loved Mario Kart from the original iteration on the SNES to like N64 version, the GBA one in particular, the 3DS one, the Mario Kart 7. They're all fantastic games, but yeah, I do enjoy them. The ability to play Mario characters, the interesting tracks, the great gameplay. I guess why it's slightly lower than some of the other games that I mentioned, I do find it a little bit soulless in single player. Sometimes I think it really only comes to life in multiplayer, but that's really the only criticism that I have of the game. Actually, at this point, I want to give another honourable mention, which really I think is deserving of the same number slot, and that is Beach Buggy Racing 2. This originally came out in 2018 on mobile phones, but the version I'm talking about is when it came to consoles and PC in 2021. It's done by Vector Unit Incorporated. They're the people behind Hydro Thunder Hurricane, that wonderful Xbox 360 sequel, and the brilliant Riptide 1 and 2 games, which if you've not played are fantastic. Of course, they did the first Beach Buggy Racing game and Beach Buggy Blitz. Oh, and of course they went on to do the Nickelodeon Kart Racers 1 and 2, which aren't that great. But the reason I've called out Beach Buggy Racing 2, quite a mouthful I've got to grant you, is because it is amazing. It's a much better single player experience than most other kart racers. So much content, so much to see and do. Just a really, really solid. In fact, I do prefer it for single player to Mario Kart, really. I think it gives a much better experience. There's so much variety to the tracks. The characters look a little generic, but you can't grow to love them. The music is amazing. This really needs to be played by more. Okay, let's go on to number 12. I've chosen Daytona USA. This was developed and published by Sega, came out in 1994. This was, along with after Virtua Racing, the true revolution of 3D racing games. They really took it to another level by having texture mapped racing very much ahead of its time. Great graphics, great music, lovely tracks. It's so iconic to sort of like play through today. There's a great version on the 360 that you can buy digitally and the PS3. I don't know if it's still available today, but that's a great way to play it today. You can also play this, of course, on the Sega Model 1 and 2 boards emulation, but you often see it at retro locations. Arcade Club in Bury has the first game. Retro Realms has like a remaster version, like a anniversary edition of it. But I mean, I just enjoy it. I mean, I love the Sega Saturn port as well, and of course I played it to death. But I truly loved it was on the Dreamcast. The home ports are fantastic ways to play it, and you know, actually Redream of the Dreamcast is one real treat way of playing it, because of course you get all the extra content and the upscaled beautiful graphics of the Dreamcast version that in some ways makes it as pretty, if not prettier, than the arcade original. Yeah, I adore it. It's one that well worthy going back to. Okay, we're on number 11, and I've chosen Wagan Midnight Maximum Tune 6. Now, I could have chosen any in the series. The reason is pretty much, as far as I can tell, they tell the same story again and again. Don't see much difference in the story, but they improve the graphics each time. So, of course, 6, one of the later ones, came out in 2018, is prettier. But I've probably also gone for that one because it's the only one that I've been able to get the English patch working on as well. So that's another factor that you can play it in English when I do emulation. It's done by Bandai Namco, and therefore you see like Pac-Man references and things like this. But what's great about Wagram Midnight series is it's sort of set a story about sort of again illegal racing. I don't know if it's like Initial D where it's based on anime as well, but you know, it's illegal racing through Japan and the highways of Tokyo. It's more city-based than Initial D, but it's got the fantastic music of Yuzo Kochiro, who of course did Streets of Rage and things like that. So his tunes are awesome in this and really elevate it. But I love the sort of story mode. The idea is you're racing, that you'll hear snippets from the different characters, and you start to learn the characters and the story of what's happening around you. It's just really engaging. I mean, it is very on the rails. I mean, you do see that they always make it like right to the nth one, no matter how badly you're driving. It's taking the visual story element sometimes over the driving, but I still love it for all of that. So it's one that I would love to have seen some of the later ones get a home port. I mean, you've got the first in the series, I think, on the PS2 in Japan, get a version, but there hasn't really been many home ports, and this would, I think, do so well in the home. Thankfully, Technoparrot, yet again, emulates it perfectly, and that's probably the only way to play it, particularly because Arcade Club did have Wagan Midnight Maximum 3DX, or whatever it was called, which was a fantastic version where we played to death and loved and enjoyed. But sadly, it broke down and it's never come back. So such a shame, really, because it's a hidden gem, I think, to a lot of people in the West. So it needs to be played by more. Okay, let's go to our final 10. And at number 10, I've chosen Sega Rally 2. Developed and published by Sega, of course. And, you know, this came out in 1998 and the sequel to Sega Championship Rally 1. This, as well as being in the arcades, came out on the Dreamcast and other platforms. And, yeah, it's just fantastic, really. You get to, like the first one, you do championship events, you know, you make your way through. It's got the great sort of like skidding on and feeling of different surfaces as you race through. Just plays so well. I mean, I love the original, have so much fun with that, but the sequel, I think, gives you additional content and therefore is the one to really shout out. These days, I would probably play it in the home on the Sega Dreamcast, perhaps through Redream, emulate it and elevated up. The arcade games, I know the first one certainly you can play on the Model 1 emulator. I don't know actually with the sequel. The first game as well with Sega Rally Championship is a sit-down version of it is in Arcade Club in Bury, so that's another one worthwhile to shout out. Yeah, I adore it. I adore it. Okay, let's go on to number 9, and I've chosen Horizon Chase 2, developed by Akiris Game Studio. You know, I think this is a great sequel. I mean, to be honest, I'm again including Horizon Chase 1. Horizon Chase 1 was a revelation as well. You know, it's a total love letter to those sort of like Lotus style racers back in the day, particularly actually it's Top Gear on the SNES that it's a particular love letter to, which was the console version of the Lotus games, really, much to them. the anger of magnetic fields, because they really felt like they were done over by Gremlin, sort of essentially taking their engine and coming up with a new license, or certainly the idea, if not the engine. But Horizon Chase 2, the reason I've chosen this one is because I adore the first one and all the DLC, and I'd enjoy playing those, but the second one has such beautiful graphics. It really does look stunning. Particularly plays much better, I think, on the Xbox XS or Xbox or the PS4, PS5 than it does on the Switch. I felt on the Switch, which I did buy first, that it feels a bit too on rails. You feel more in control with the Xbox and PS5 version, or the PC version for that matter. Has fantastic music again, like the first one. I don't know if Barry Leach is involved in this one, who of course did the Lotus 2 and the Top Gear SNES games. But no, I think Horizon Chase 2 is one that I'm certainly playing to death. I love the variety. I love the look and feel of it, and a game like this exists in the modern world. The only thing that's annoying with Horizon Chase 2 is, annoyingly, they've done like a deal with Epic Games, which means you have to log into Epic Games wherever you buy it. It's so stupid and so annoying that they've done this, because to be honest, as big a fan as I am, I nearly gave up. It's that many hoops you have to jump through, and I hate that after I've paid for the frigging game that I'm forced to sign up. Even though I'm already signed up to Epic Games, I don't want to use Epic Games when signing up. But that aside, once you do it, it's no longer a problem, really. Just stupid decision by the developers and really over the top of Epic Games, quite frankly. But beyond that, Horizon Chase 2, brilliant game, needs to be played by me. And when you've done that, play the first one as well. Okay, let's go on to number 8, and I've chosen Crazy Taxi, developed and published by Sega, and this came out in 1999. The game has unique gameplay mechanic of you sort of like driving a taxi around sort of like Sunderland, sort of San Francisco style city. There's so many ways to get through, and the concept's so cool. Pick up a passenger, they tell you where to go, there's a big arrow pointing in the rough direction, but you don't necessarily have to follow the direction of the arrow. If you know the city well, you can take shortcuts and perhaps get there quicker, and obviously get more money the quicker you drop them off. If you're seen as speedy, you get money, and the concept is that you also get more time, and then you keep on going and try and deliver as many passengers from as many points within the strict time limit. It's a great concept. I adore it. The Dreamcast has a brilliant port. Probably the best port, though, is the GameCube port that came later. That's probably the best way to play it, because it still has all the Pizza Hut and KFC references, and more importantly, the Offspring music. They did re-release it, Sega, digitally. You can buy it still today, I think, but frustratingly, or you could until recently, where they've cut away all the back catalogue. But that version, as good as it is gameplay-wise, they replaced the music because they didn't have the Offspring license, and I guess they removed all the real world references, which is a big part of the game, and it's such a shame. So my advice, obviously you can play on Redream or play the arcade in the home. That's one way of doing it. Yeah, I think Redream is probably the best way to go, or Dolphin on the GameCube. Brilliant ways to sort of play it today. They do have Crazy Taxi and Arcade Club in Bury, so you can play it for free play. Nowhere I know, as I say, the sequels, which I don't think came out in the arcades, certainly the second one, they didn't come out in the arcades, I'm pretty sure. So they're probably worthy of your time as well. Dreamcast had a sequel called Crazy Taxi 2 that had you in New York, fantastic. But there's also Crazy Taxi 3, which was an Xbox exclusive, original Xbox. Annoyingly, the Xbox emulation is so dismal, you can't really play it. It just runs at super slow frame rate. But of course, you can chip your original Xbox easily enough, because it is quite an expensive game to pick up these days, because it's Crazy Taxi and it's the only way to play it still to this day. But Crazy Taxi, love the games, and I'm excited to see what Sega do with the next update that they're planning. Also reticent, if I'm honest, because Sega, I don't feel today is a company that really respects its past. They just see it as another cash cow. But let's go on to number 7, and I've gone for Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing. This was released in 2010, developed by Sumo Digital, who of course did all the Outrun 2 home ports, and published by Sega. And this was not the first time that Sega did a kart racing game with Sega characters, because of course Sonic Drift 1 and 2 came out on the Game Gear, but it was the first decent one that they came out on. It came out on the Xbox 360, PS3 and PC, and there is also an arcade version of it as well. That came out later. I adore this. It's great Mario Kart clone if you want. You have Sonic, you have Jet Set Radio, Shamu, so many characters of Sega's past, so many references, so many wonderful remixes of all the tunes. It's a real love letter to Sega and the wonder of the game. So yeah, I just adore this, and I prefer the original and the purity of the game over Transformed, which tried to deviate away from the Mario Kart genres. As you can see, I prefer this game to Mario Kart, and I stand by that. That's probably because I'm a huge Sega nut, but also I find it's a better single player experience. There's no blue shell for a start. There's no stupid power-ups that make you lose at last minute. I think kind of balancing. That's just me. I adore this game, and I'd love to see a remaster of it, although I have to say it looks gorgeous on the PC. Of course you can upscale it to the mains. Okay, we're on the last 6 now, and for number 6 I've chosen Ridge Racer 7. This was developed and published by Namco and came out in 2006 for the PlayStation 3. Now, there was a real sort of hoo-ha at this time because Ridge Racer 6 was an exclusive to the Xbox 360 and a launch title, and that was sadly the death of arcade racing. I remember all these blimmin' reviewers like young whippersnapper gits from IGN and things that just did plight quietness when they did the announcement because they're not into those sort of arcade races. It wasn't anything new when the Xbox got announced, and it really was the death knell. You know, just the taste, I guess, of arcade racing had moved away. People wanted realism and customization, and it's so sad. It sort of breaks my heart. But Ridge Racer 6 on the Xbox 360 had the annoying voice and things like this. The PS3 exclusive Ridge Racer 7 basically expanded even further. It had even more wonderful variety to the tracks, all the brilliant music. It really was the pinnacle of the series. I mean, only probably Ridge Racer on the PSP gave you more content and more playability, but of course it didn't have the same level of graphics of the PS3 version. And of course, sadly, because of this change of direction, Namco did something totally different with Ridge Racer 8, making it pretty much unrecognisable as a Ridge Racer game. and breaking my heart, that was the last Ridge Racer game that we had. It's just sad and depressing because it's such a wonderful series and it needs to be remastered. It really does. And Namco, please give Ridge Racer another chance. Okay, let's go on to number 5, and we choose here Project Gotham Racing 2. I adore this game. Of course, it's Bizarre Creation who did MSR and before that the Killing Game Show and things like that, and Wiz and Liz, but Bizarre Creations really, I think, hit their zenith with Project Gotham Racing 2, published by Microsoft Game Studios in 2003 for the original Xbox. And whilst the Project Gotham 1 was basically a remaster of MSR, it always felt rushed as a game. It's not as good as MSR because, of course, they were still learning the hardware. But with the sequel, they just took what was great about Project Gotham and MSR ideals, but had the wonderful arcade racing mechanics. Still, you had to brake and negotiate. So much more variety to the locations. It really took you all over the world to so many wonderful places. Amazing music. I adore it. Going from Barcelona, Edinburgh, Hong Kong. This is one of my favourite racing games of all time, as you can see with the list here. It still has that wonderful kudos system, and I think Gotham Racing 3 and 4, while prettier and more popular with a lot of reviewers back in the day, they went away from arcade racing. They went more towards, you could tell they were taking elements from Forza series, which of course is another Microsoft genre, and trying to tweak and hone the racing mechanics. And for me, they're just not as engaging. They should have stuck with the more arcade racing of Project Gotham 2, in my opinion. Of course, famously, Bizarre Creations, after doing Project Gotham Racing 4, left Microsoft because they were sick of basically making those games. And Microsoft let them go, and they did Blur, which is something a bit different, but sadly they pretty much closed their doors with Activision because they just didn't have the success outside of Microsoft. I think I would love to see a remaster Project Gotham Racing 2 in particular, but any of the Project Gothams. I think it's a genre and a series that's so important to Microsoft's past. It fries my brain why they think there's not a place for it when clearly it's so vastly different to Forza Horizon. I'm clearly unique in my opinion, but I don't really rate Forza or Forza Horizon. Forza's a different beast. It's simulation, which is something I don't go for. But Forza Horizon, I don't think it's as good as everybody makes out. Every time I try it, I find it quite empty. I just don't like the setup, I guess, of it. Sadly, Xbox emulation is so woeful, it doesn't even start Project Gotham Racing 2. It's crazy that I can emulate PS3 and all these other systems, even the 360, but they still can't get Xbox original working. Microsoft clearly have done a better job. On the 360, you could play Project Gotham Racing 2, and it plays, but clearly probably for licensing reasons, they seem to take away the music. The music doesn't work properly, which is a big part of the game because the soundtrack and listening to the radio is a huge part of the game. So yeah, it's one that really the only way of playing it is on the Xbox, really. Okay, let's go on to number 4, and I've chosen Burnt Out 2 Point of Impact. This is developed by Criterion Games and published by Acclaim Entertainment, and came out in 2002 on the PlayStation 2 and later on the Xbox and GameCube. This is such an amazing series. I love the Burnout games. The Burnout one was brilliant with the concept of sort of like risk and reward, where you would actually build up turbo for racing on the other side of the track or causing crashes around you. Of course, it showed everything in slow motion as a cutscene on the fly when exciting things happened, so it just looked really, really cool. But it's a really amazing, intense arcade racing game, and whilst the crashes and destructions of the first, it was wonderful, The sequel, number 2, took it even further really, and just had more content and more things to enjoy. I mean, I love them all really, but number 2 for me was the pinnacle. Number 3, they tried some more things, and it's still a great game, don't get me wrong. I mean, I love Burnout 3 as well, but I felt it was muddying the waters a little bit from the purity of the first 2 games. And Burnout Paradise, I don't really enjoy as a game. They decided to go open world. Sadly, that's the only one that's been remastered by EA and what have you, but yeah, I mean, it's obviously any Burnout game is good, but I would say Burnout Paradise is the weakest of the series. So it seems such a weirdness to me. I guess it shows you the taste of others is different from me, where they prefer more open world style racing games rather than just having the purity and fun of an arcade racing game. The counter to that I would say is that go to arcades and watch what people were playing. They're flocking around the arcade racers. They're holding up today. Outrun 2 is on loads and loads of places still, because although it's such an old game, it's what people enjoy playing, that accessibility. Right, but let's go on to number 3, and I've chosen Outrun. Yes, the original Outrun, released in 1986 by Sega and made by Yu Suzuki and the AM2 team. This was not only historically important to the game, it's one that I adore to this day. The racing of a Ferrari Testarossa, you make your way through exotic sunny locales. The choosing of the route was very innovative at the time. The music is amazing and fantastic. It still holds up and plays as wonderful today as it always did. Yeah, I mean, this was the thing that got me into really gaming in the arcades, and particularly the racing genre. I mean, I remember the first time seeing the Outrun cabinet, the deluxe one, and just being blown away as a little kid, and trying to play it, not doing very well, but just watching other people play, I was just mesmerised by it, and it's one that is so true and pure to my heart that I just think it's fantastic. Ways of playing it today, well, sadly, because of licensing, you can't really. The last time you could play the original Outrun in the best way is probably the Japanese version on the Sega Saturn of Outrun that you could buy, because that was at 60 hertz and had extra music you could choose, and had, more importantly, the original car sprite. Subsequent versions on the Dreamcast, like the Yu Suzuki collection, or ones that appeared on Shamu, and even the ones on the 3DS, which is an amazing version, by the way. I don't know, maybe Sony PS4 maybe has it as well. Certainly, sadly not on the Xbox, but I think that is brilliant renditions of them, but you don't get the right sprite. They've had to change the sprite to make it not look like the Ferrari Testarossa. And of course, that's a big part of the game, changing the sprite. But in the home ports, I'd probably say, yeah, the 3DS version is a beautiful version to play. Likewise, the the Sega Ages version you can buy on the Switch and PS4. It's just basically the same one. Yeah, they are great, but you do miss having the original sprite. The Sega Saturn, as I mentioned, the Japanese version, or the Sega Ages, which came out only at 50 hertz in Europe, are fantastic, don't get me wrong. Versions with the original sprites. Thankfully, Arcade Club in Bury has the deluxe cabinet. That's the moving one. Yeah, brilliant. I mean, the only thing with it, they probably, because they're world's second best in the world, regularly plays it. It's on hard, it's on the championship settings, to get the high score, not the easy versions for us mere mortals. So playing it, you might be a little bit saddened at how poorly you do, but yeah, it's really, really cool. Okay, let's go to number 2, and I had to choose. It's the original Ridge Racer, released in 1993 by Namco. Came out just before the Daytona, and not long after Virtua Racing. It's amazing how far 3D had evolved in such a short space of time when you think of Spence and Virtua Racing. This obviously had not only texture mapping, amazing music, but really fun mechanics. You know, the way that you sort of drifted into the turns, it just works so well as a mechanic, which of course was so synonymous to Ridge Racer ever since. Yeah, there's something about the original, you know, I mean, you could argue like Rave Racer and Rage Racer, the sequels, did more, and Ridge Racer Revolution, these home ports did more tracks and things. But there's something about the original. You know, this was a large part why the PS1 did so well, because obviously having Ridge Racer, pretty fantastic version. I mean, it felt arcade perfect at the time. Clearly wasn't, but you know, to have that in the home was such a big deal, and it was the main reason, in my opinion, for the PlayStation success that they took on. Ways of playing it today, it does appear in MAME, and you can, with a bit of tweaking, get it working right. That's probably the best way of playing it in the home. Arcade Club in Bury fantastically have the sit-down Ridge Racer in Arcade Club in Bury, and you know, that's always, when we do the meetup with the podcast, that's always on the list, who can get the best score on the track. We always do the easy track and see, you know, to be fair to the guys there, like literally milliseconds from like the world best. It's crazy how good these guys have got over the years of our meetups. I'm useless to that level, but I still enjoy this game, as I do with all the series, really. Okay, so that brings us up to number 1, and of course it is Outrun 2, and I probably would say the SDX edition, which you know, it came out in 2006, and the original was 2003, I think. So let's give you a bit of a history. Outrun 2, which was a fantastic update by Sega AM2 and Sega, they really sort of took it forward with what you could do, and it's still, to me, the best arcade racing game of all time. But one of the weaknesses of Outrun 2 was some of the tracks were, I mean, you were going in like construction sites, and it was quite bizarre, some of the choices. Castles, it was a little bit somber, the palette, it didn't really jibe with that sort of vibrant Sega blue skies, fantastical places that you were racing in, amazing mechanics. And clearly that was a lot of feedback that Sega took. So they came out with the 2006 edition, which was on the home ports was known as Coast to Coast, and that had much more interesting locations that you could encounter and sort of work through. Now, they did do the SDX edition, which is the one that I'm calling out as the best arcade racing, and basically it was Coast to Coast. It gave you some options as well of choosing between Outrun 2 or the Coast to Coast levels, so you got the best of all of it, really. But the SDX version had enhanced graphics, it was a higher resolution, it allowed local network multiplayer, so you could do like 4 or whatever. I don't know how many it went up to, probably 4, I think, maybe 6 actually, or 8 even, I don't know. But you could do like multi racing. I think I've seen 8 actually, and it just took it to another level. It's fantastic. Now, home port wise, Sumo Digital did release fantastic home ports on Sega's behalf on the Xbox originally with Outrun 2, and then they did Outrun 2 Coast to Coast on Xbox, PC and PS2, and then later you also got the PSP. All amazing games. These days, the only real way to play it, outside of finding it in many of the arcades, because it's such an amazing game, you'll find it in most modern arcades despite its age. It still holds up. Arcade Club in Bury does have multiple versions of this you can play, and that's a fantastic way of playing it. In the home though, Technoparrot is probably the best way of all, because you can actually elevate through emulation the resolution even further. You can upscale it up to 4K basically. It looks beautiful and fantastic, and they've ironed out a lot of the graphical glitches that you've got, so it just runs perfectly. You have to go through a lot of hoops to get the right patch for the right graphics card and things like that, but it's worth it. It is the best way playing Outrun 2. With my steering wheel and pedals, it's one that I always put on and I adore, and the kids, like my granddaughter enjoys, or and if we have any friends over that's got kids, I always put Outrun 2 and they're like besotted playing through, having a wonderful time. Yeah, so that is definitely one that I'm happy to say is my favourite arcade racer of all time. So there you have it. There is my personal top 100, or technically 101 arcade-style racers on any platform. It's a genre that's sadly fallen out of favour with publishers today, and it fries my brain as to why, because I think there's clearly love and demand. You only have to look at arcades are filled with arcade racers. They're the ones that seem to sell, so why publishers don't think it can do it in the home, I don't know, or why they don't re-release a lot of these fantastic arcade racers as home ports, I don't know either. But, thankfully, as you're seeing, there's such a vast library in the history when it was popular, that there's a multitude of wonderful arcade races for you to enjoy, and probably a lot that are new for you to discover. And of course, what's great with emulation is upscaling of a lot of these games, giving it a new release of life. I mean, seeing things like, Ridge Racer 64 on the Switch, or through emulation without the N64 blur, or any the Beetle Adventure Racing without the blur of the N64. These are just wonderful to see like how beautiful these games could look on, that were on the PS1, that had that low poly feel to it. Being scaled up just looks fantastic, making them almost feel like new games that hold a place in people's hearts. Now, I'm sure there's going to be lots of games that you feel that I've missed out or need to try, and please reach out in the comments respectfully and tell me the ones that you would have chosen, and because I'm all for discovering new games, and I'm not saying these are the ones, my favourite arcade racers of all the ones I've played a lot, but that's not to say I've played all of them, and I'm all about new discoveries. But even at 100 games, or 101, the amount of arcade races that I left on the floor was amazing. There's some amazing quality that just didn't make my personal list, so it's reinvigorated me, rather than feeling sad that arcade racing is no longer in fashion, that there's enough content and enough revitalization through emulation to make you enjoy and play these games again. So hope you'll join me in sort of like replaying all these classics and new ones, and just send the thumbs up and champion these fantastic racers again. It's just such an enjoyable journey to go through these games again. They still all hold up fantastically well. So there you go, enjoy the podcast that we do on the Retro Gaming Discussion Show. Please subscribe, comment and watch. I mean, and the team put so much effort into these videos or the podcasts we do, and whilst we do fantastically well on the audio side of the podcast, we don't really get many views on the video. And I get it, because a lot of our stuff is not designed for YouTube typical content. I mean, you want to make views on YouTube, you just put like a sexy woman in a compromising picture and say watch it to the end and you'll get 1 million views. I get how YouTube works, and I get that's what the algorithm looks for, not long discussions and thoughtful discussions on old games. But yeah, it's not me, and I would never do that kind of content, because we do the content that we like. If you do enjoy, please like, subscribe, comment, interact with these videos in the community, and help. We never do it for money. We're not really, that's not us. We do this for the love of it, and but that little interaction just keeps us going, because we know that people enjoy our content. So until next time, keep it retro.